In the fog-choked village of Blackthorn Hollow, a cryptic letter summons Hercule Poirot to unravel a chilling mystery. The heiress Clara Vane has vanished, her trail leading to the sinister Vane Manor, where whispers of an ancient cult and cursed relics echo. Why did Clara disappear? What secrets lurk in the manor's locked rooms and hidden tunnels? As eerie screams pierce the night and shadowy figures stalk the woods, Poirot's little gray cells face a terror that threatens to consume the village. Will he unmask the truth before the fog hides it forever? Dive into a tale of suspense, betrayal, and dark secrets in Hercule Poirot's Hidden Terror. Chapter 1. The Whisper in the Fog. The train screeched to a halt at Blackthorn Hollow, a speck of a station cloaked in a fog so thick it seemed to swallow sound itself. Hercule Poirot adjusted his impeccable mustache, his sharp eyes scanning the platform through the carriage window. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of wet earth and something less tangible, a faint unease that clung like mist to the skin. He stepped onto the platform, his polished shoes clicking against the uneven wood, and pulled his overcoat tighter against a chill. The station was deserted, save for a lone porter who shuffled forward, his face half hidden by a woolen scarf. "Monsieur Poirot," the porter mumbled, voice muffled, as if the fog had seeped into his throat. "Carriage to the village is waiting." Poirot nodded, his mind already turning over the peculiar summons that had brought him here. The letter, delivered to his London flat 3 days prior, was an enigma, written in a hurried, elegant hand. It bore no signature, only a plea: "Come to Blackthorn Hollow. A terror hides here, and only you can uncover it." The paper smelled faintly of lavender, and the postmark confirmed this forgotten corner of England as its origin. Poirot, never one to resist a puzzle, had packed at once. The carriage rattled along a winding road, the driver silent as the fog pressed against the windows like a living thing. Blackthorn Hollow emerged slowly, its thatched cottages and crooked lanes materializing as if conjured. The village was small, no more than a cluster of homes orbiting a stone church, its spire piercing the mist. Poirot's destination was the Blackthorn Inn, a squat building with ivy strangling its walls. The sign above the door creaked in the wind, depicting a thorned branch curling around a faded crescent moon. Inside, the inn was warm but dim, lit by flickering oil lamps. A handful of patrons hunched over their drinks, their conversation dying as Poirot entered. The innkeeper, a broad man with a face like weathered oak, looked up from polishing a glass. "You, the detective, then?" he asked, his tone more curious than welcoming. I am Hercule Poirot," he replied, his voice precise, carrying the faintest trace of his Belgian roots. "I require a room and, perhaps, some information." The innkeeper, who introduced himself as Tom Harrow, grunted and slid a key across the counter. "Rooms upstairs. Information's harder to come by. Folk here don't talk much to strangers." Poirot smiled thinly. "Then it is fortunate, Monsieur Harrow, that I am skilled at persuading silence to speak." He settled at a corner table, ordering a tisane to combat the damp chill. The patrons resumed their murmurs, but their glances lingered. Poirot sipped his drink, his ears attuned to the low hum of voices. A name surfaced, spoken in a hushed, almost reverent tone. "Clara Vane." He leaned forward, straining to catch more. "She's been gone nigh on 3 weeks." A grizzled man muttered to his companion, a wiry fellow with nervous hands. "Vanished, they say, from the manor." "Manor's cursed," the wiry man replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Always has been. Clara was a fool to poke about up there." Poirot's interest sharpened. The letter had mentioned no names, yet this Clara Vane seemed central to the village's unease. He made a mental note to inquire further, but knew better than to press too soon. The villagers' guarded eyes told him trust was a currency hard-earned here. As evening deepened, the inn filled with a motley crowd: farmers, a blacksmith with soot-stained hands, and a young woman whose sharp features and restless gaze marked her as an outsider. She sat alone, scribbling in a notebook, her pen pausing whenever someone passed too close. Poirot, ever observant, noted her quick glances toward the door. as if expecting someone or something. He approached her table, his demeanor polished yet disarming. "Pardon, mademoiselle, but you seem a student of this village. May I, Poirot, join you for a moment?" She looked up, her eyes narrowing, then softening as she took in his fastidious appearance. "You're the detective," she said, more statement than question. "I'm Ellen Marsh, journalist, writing a piece on rural folklore. What brings you to this godforsaken place?" Poirot smiled, seating himself. "A mystery, naturally. I am told of a terror, as my correspondent put it. Perhaps you have heard of such things." Elon's pen stilled. "Terror is a strong word, but Blackthorn's got its share of shadows." "You've heard about Clara Vane, I assume." "Only whispers," Poirot admitted. "She is missing. Missing, or worse," Ellen said, leaning closer. "Clara was the Vane family's heiress. Lived up at Vane Manor, that gloomy pile on the hill. She was poking into things, old family secrets, village legends. Then, poof, gone, no trace. The Vanes say she ran off, but nobody here believes that." Poirot's fingers drummed lightly on the table. "And these legends, mademoiselle, they are connected to the manor." Ellen hesitated, glancing around. "They say the manor's built on old ground, pagan. Some claim there's talk of a cult, long gone, but maybe not as gone as people think. Clara was obsessed with it. Wrote to me once, asking for my notes on local history. I sent her what I had, but then she stopped replying." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "You have these notes still?" "Some," Ellen said, patting her notebook. "But I'm not fool enough to dig too deep. People here get cagey when you mention the manor or the Vanes." Before Poirot could press further, the inn's door swung open, admitting a gust of cold air and a tall, angular man in a tailored coat. His presence commanded the room. Conversations faltered, and even Ellen stiffened. He scanned the inn, his gaze settling on Poirot with unsettling intensity. "That's Edgar Vane," Ellen whispered, "Clara's cousin. He runs the manor now, with his mother, Lady Evelyn." Edgar approached, his steps measured, his face a mask of polite curiosity. "Monsieur Poirot, I presume. My mother heard of your arrival. She insists you dine with us at Vane Manor tomorrow evening. We are eager to assist with your inquiries." Poirot inclined his head. "Most kind, Monsieur Vane. I accept." Edgar's smile was tight, revealing nothing. "Until tomorrow." Then, he turned and left, the fog swallowing him as the door closed. Ellen exhaled. "Be careful up there. The Vanes don't invite outsiders lightly. Clara used to say the manor had eyes always watching." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Then it is fortunate, mademoiselle, that I, too, am skilled at watching." That night, in his small room above the inn, Poirot sat at a rickety desk, the anonymous letter before him. He reread its words, his mind weaving a tapestry of clues. Clara Vane, the manor, a possible cult, and now this invitation. The fog outside pressed against the window, and for a moment he thought he heard a whisper, not from the inn, but from the night itself. He dismissed it as fancy, yet his instincts, honed by years of unraveling human secrets, told him Blackthorn Hollow held a darkness that would test even his little gray cells. The next morning, Poirot ventured into the village, determined to gather more before facing the Vanes. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing Blackthorn Hollow's stark beauty. Stone walls most covered, lanes twisting like veins, and the church looming like a silent sentinel. He entered the church, hoping its records might shed light on Clara or the manor's history. The vicar, a frail man named Reverend Hale, greeted him with cautious warmth. "A detective in Blackthorn," he said, peering over wire-rimmed glasses. "We're not accustomed to such visitors." "I seek only truth," Poirot replied. "Tell me, Reverend of Clara Vane, and this manor that casts so long a shadow." Hale's hands trembled as he adjusted his glasses. Clara was a bright soul, too curious for her own good. She came here often, asking about old parish records, said she was tracing her family's past. "I warned her, some things are better left buried in the manor," Poirot pressed. Hale glanced at the altar, as if seeking strength. "It's old, older than the village. built on a site the pagans revered. There are stories of rituals, of disappearances. I don't hold with such talk, but Clara believed it. She said the manor kept secrets in its walls. Poirot nodded, filing away the vicar's words. And these records, may I see them? Hale hesitated, then led him to a dusty archive beneath the church. The records were sparse, but Poirot found a mention of a vain ancestor, Sir Alaric, who vanished in 1793 after meddling with forbidden rites. A later entry noted strange lights seen near the manor in the years following. Poirot copied the details, his mind racing. The vicar's unease was palpable, and as Poirot left, he caught Hale crossing himself a gesture that spoke volumes. The village market was next. A modest affair of stalls, selling produce and trinkets. Poirot moved among the crowd, his ears open. A fishmonger grumbled about queer folk at the manor, while a seamstress hinted at Clara's late-night walks to the woods. The most intriguing tidbit came from a boy selling apples, who claimed to have seen a ghost near the manor's gates, a figure in white, vanishing into the fog. By afternoon, Poirot's notebook brimmed with fragments, Clara's curiosity, the manor's dark history, and the villagers' fear. He returned to the inn to prepare for dinner, choosing his attire with care, a signal to the veins that he was no mere meddler. As he dressed, Ellen knocked, her face pale. "I found something," she said, handing him a crumpled photograph. It showed Clara standing before a gnarled oak, her expression tense. Behind her, half hidden by branches, was a shadow that could have been a person or something else. "Where was this taken?" Poirot asked. "Near the manor, in the woods," Ellen said. "I took it myself, a month ago." Clara wouldn't say why she was there, but she was scared, kept looking over her shoulder. Poirot studied the image, his mind cataloging its details. "You have done well, mademoiselle. This may be significant." As evening fell, the carriage arrived to take Poirot to Vane Manor. The journey was silent, the fog returning with a vengeance, curling around the horses like spectral hands. The manor loomed suddenly, a Gothic sprawl of turrets and stained glass, its windows glowing like eyes. Poirot stepped out, his heart steady but alert. The front door creaked open, revealing a butler whose gaunt face seemed carved from the manor's own stone. "Welcome, Monsieur Poirot," the butler intoned. "The family awaits." The dining hall was grand, yet oppressive, its walls lined with portraits of stern-faced Vanes. Lady Evelyn, a woman of regal bearing and cold eyes, presided at the table's head. Edgar sat to her right, his gaze flickering between Poirot and his plate. A third figure, introduced as Miss Leela Gray, the governess, sat opposite, her delicate features betraying a nervous energy. The meal was lavish: roast, pheasant, glazed, vegetables, but the air was thick with unspoken tension. "You come at a curious time, Monsieur Poirot," Lady Evelyn said, her voice like polished steel. "Our Clara's absence has caused much distress." "Indeed," Madame Poirot replied, cutting his pheasant with precision. "Her disappearance is why I am here." "I understand she was inquisitive." Edgar's fork paused mid-air. "Clara was reckless," he said, too quickly, "always chasing stories. She likely ran off to London or some such nonsense." Leela Gray's eyes darted to Edgar, then away. "She was kind," she murmured. "She didn't deserve whatever happened." Poirot noted the governess's hesitation, the way Lady Evelyn's fingers tightened on her glass. "And what, precisely, do you believe happened, Mademoiselle Gray?" The room stilled. Leela flushed, her words faltering. I don't know. She was just gone." Lady Evelyn intervened, her tone sharp. "Enough speculation. Monsieur Poirot, you'll find no answers in idle gossip. Clara will return when she's ready." Poirot smiled, his eyes never leaving hers. "I find, madame, that gossip often hides a kernel of truth. It is my task to find it." The conversation shifted to mundane topics, but Poirot's mind was elsewhere, dissecting every glance, every pause. As dessert was served a tart of blackthorn berries, their bitterness lingering. Edgar mentioned a locked room in the manor, once Clara's study. "No one's been inside since she left," he said, his tone casual, but his eyes watchful. Most curious, Poirot said. Perhaps I might see this room. Lady Evelyn's smile was a blade. In time, perhaps. The manor is old, full of locked doors. Not all are meant to be opened. The dinner ended with strained pleasantries, and Poirot was shown to a guest room. As he prepared for bed, the manor seemed to pulse with secrets, its creaks and groans like whispers of warning. He stood at the window, gazing into the fog, when a scream shattered the silence, a high, piercing sound from the manor's upper floors. Poirot seized his cane and hurried into the corridor, his heart pounding not with fear, but with anticipation. The hallway was dark, the screams echo fading. He reached a stairwell, where Lila Gray stood, her face pale as moonlight. It came from upstairs, she whispered, but it stopped. Poirot nodded, his mind alight. Then, mademoiselle, we shall see what the night hides. They ascended, but the upper floors were silent, the doors locked. The scream, it seemed, had no source or none they could find. Poirot returned to his room, his resolve hardened. The manor, the veins, the village all were pieces in a puzzle he would solve. As he closed his eyes, the fog outside seemed to whisper Clara's name, and Poirot knew his work had only begun. Chapter 2. Shadows of Vane Manor. The fog clung to Blackthorn Hollow like a shroud, its tendrils curling around the gnarled oaks that lined the path to Vane Manor. Hercule Poirot adjusted his overcoat, the damp chill seeping through despite the fine wool. His polished shoes clicked on the uneven cobblestones, a rhythmic counterpoint to the distant hoot of an owl. The anonymous letter crinkled in his pocket, its words etched in his mind. A secret festers in Blackthorn Hollow. Come to Vane Manor. Truth awaits. The manor loomed ahead, a gothic silhouette against the bruised sky, its spires stabbed upward, as if daring the heavens to strike. Ivy crawled over the stone facade, choking the windows like a living thing. Poirot's mustache twitched as he noted the asymmetry. A single window on the third floor, shuttered tight, stood out against the others, its frame weathered and dark. Curious, he thought. A house with secrets always wears them on its face. The heavy oak door creaked open before he could knock, revealing a butler whose gaunt frame seemed to belong to the manor itself. His eyes, pale as the fog, assessed Poirot with a flicker of suspicion. Monsieur Poirot, I presume. His voice was dry, like leaves skittering across a crypt. Indeed, Poirot replied, offering a slight bow. I am expected. N'est-ce pas? A butler, who introduced himself as Mr. Harrow, inclined his head. Lady Evelyn awaits you in the dining hall. This way. The interior of Vane Manor was a study in faded opulence. Crimson wallpaper peeled at the edges, and portraits of stern-faced ancestors glared from gilded frames. The air carried the scent of old wood and wax, undercut by something sharper, mothballs perhaps, or the tang of secrets left to rot. Poirot's keen eyes darted to the details. A chipped vase on a sideboard, a rug frayed at one corner, a chandelier missing half its crystals. A house in decline, he mused, but proud enough to hide it. Harrow led him through a labyrinth of corridors, each turn revealing more of the manor's decay. A grandfather clock ticked unevenly, its pendulum swaying like a hypnotist's watch. Poirot's fingers brushed the letter in his pocket again, grounding him. The invitation to dine had come from Lady Evelyn Vane herself, though the letter's sender remained a mystery. Someone wishes me to see this family up close, he thought. But why? The dining hall was a cavernous space, its long mahogany table, set for four. Candlelight danced on silverware, casting shadows that writhed like specters. At the head of the table sat Lady Evelyn Vane, a woman whose presence seemed to command the very air. Her silver hair was pinned tightly, and her emerald gown shimmered, though her eyes sharp and unyielding betrayed no warmth. To her left was a young man, perhaps 30, with hollow cheeks and a nervous habit of tugging at his cufflinks. Edgar Vane, Poirot presumed. Across from him sat a woman in her late 20s, her auburn hair cascading in soft waves. Her gray dress was modest, but her eyes bright and restless suggested a mind that wandered far beyond the manor's walls. The governess, Miss Lila Gray Poirot, noted, recalling the innkeeper's mention of her. "Welcome, Monsieur Poirot, Lady," Evelyn said, her voice smooth as polished stone. "We are honored to have so renowned a detective in our humble home." Poirot bowed, his smile measured. "The honor is mine, Lady Evelyn. A fine manner you have, though it carries a certain weight of history." Nan, her lips tightened, but she gestured to an empty chair. "Please, join us. We dine simply tonight." As Poirot took his seat, he observed the dynamics. Edgar avoided his mother's gaze, his fingers drumming faintly on the table. Miss Gray's posture was rigid, her fork poised as if it were a weapon. The silence was heavy, broken only by the clink of cutlery and the distant howl of wind against the windows. A family at war with itself, Poirot thought, or with something else. The meal began with a thin soup, its flavor as bland as the conversation. Poirot decided to stir both. "I understand, Lady Evelyn, that this manor has known better days. The village speaks of a certain misfortune, the disappearance of Miss Claravane, perhaps." A spoon clattered against a bowl. Edgar's head snapped up, his eyes wide. Miss Gray froze, her knuckles whitening around her fork. Lady Evelyn, however, merely sipped her wine, unruffled. "The village talks too much," she said. "Clara was my niece, a spirited girl. She left to pursue her own path, nothing more." Left Poirot tilted his head, his tone gentle, but probing. "Yet the villagers say she vanished. No farewell, no trace. Most curious, Nan." Edgar cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. "Clara was restless, always chasing dreams. She probably ran off to London or Paris. She'd turn up." Miss Gray's eyes flicked to Edgar, then away. Poirot caught the movement, filing it away. "And you, Mademoiselle Gray, did you know Miss Clara well?" The governess hesitated, her lips parting before she spoke. "I was her confidant. In a way, she was curious about the manor's history, always asking questions." Her voice was soft, but there was an edge to it, like a blade wrapped in silk. "Questions about what, precisely?" Poirot pressed, his eyes never leaving hers. Lady Evelyn interjected, her tone sharp. "Old houses breed old stories, Monsieur Poirot. Clara was fond of fairy tales." "Nothing of substance." Poirot nodded, letting the matter drop for now. The main course arrived, a roast pheasant that was overcooked and tough. He sliced into it with precision, his mind slicing through the family's evasions with equal care. "They know more than they say," he thought. "But what do they fear?" The conversation limped along, touching on the weather, the village's harvest festival, and the manor's crumbling east wing. Poirot listened, his ears attuned to what was not said. Edgar's nervous glances toward a door at the far end of the hall caught his attention. It was heavy, reinforced with iron bands, and locked with a padlock that gleamed newer than the rest of the room. "A door that does not wish to be opened," Poirot mused, as dessert a soggy tart was served. Poirot decided to test the waters again. "This manor has many rooms, I imagine. Are all open to guests, or are some private?" Lady Evelyn's fork paused mid-air. "Some rooms are unfit for visitors. Damp, disrepair, you understand. Like that one." Poirot gestured casually toward the locked door. "It seems most intriguing." Edgar choked on his wine, coughing violently. Miss Gray's eyes widened, and she quickly looked down at her plate. Lady Evelyn's smile was a thin, dangerous thing. "That room is nothing, Monsieur Poirot. Storage, I believe. Old furniture, broken things. Yet it is locked so securely," Poirot said, his tone light. "One wonders what treasures it hides." The silence that followed was a living thing, coiling around the table. Harrow, who had been standing silently by the wall, shifted his weight, his shadow flickering in the candlelight. Poirot's mustache twitched again. "They are all complicit in this silence," he thought. "But why?" Dinner ended abruptly when Lady Evelyn rose, claiming fatigue. "Harrow will show you to your room, Monsieur Poirot. We keep early hours here." Poirot stood, bowing. "Merci beaucoup. I look forward to learning more of Vane Manor's charms." His room was on the second floor, a cavernous space with a four-poster bed and heavy drapes that smelled of dust. A single candle burned on the nightstand, its flame struggling against the darkness. Poirot unpacked his small valise, placing his silver cigarette case and a notebook on the table. He sat, jotting down observations. Lady Evelyn guarded, controlling. Edgar nervous, perhaps guilty. Miss Gray knows more than she says. The locked door central to the mystery. He was about to extinguish the candle when a sound froze. A scream, high and piercing, echoing from somewhere above. It was not a cry of pain, but of terror, raw and unfiltered. Poirot grabbed his cane and hurried into the corridor, his heart steady despite the chill that prickled his skin. The hallway was dark, the air thick with the manor's oppressive silence. The scream had come from the third floor, he was certain. He climbed the narrow staircase, his steps muffled by the threadbare runner. At the top, a long corridor stretched into shadow, lined with closed doors. The scream had stopped as suddenly as it began, leaving only the creak of the house settling. Poirot moved silently, his eyes scanning for clues. A faint draft brushed his cheek, coming from a door at the corridor's end. He approached, noting its heavy locks, similar to the one in the dining hall, but older, rusted. He pressed his ear to the wood, hearing nothing but the faint moan of wind beyond. The shuttered window, he realized, recalling the manor's facade. This was the room he'd seen from outside. He tested the handle, unsurprised to find it locked. Kneeling, he peered through the keyhole, but saw only darkness. A faint scent lingered, lavender, perhaps, or something sweeter, like decay. He straightened, his mind racing. A scream, a locked room, a family that speaks in half-truths. The puzzle begins to take shape. Returning to his room, Poirot lit another candle and sat at the desk, his notebook open. He wrote, "The scream who, voice Clara's, or another's. The locked room on the third floor, connected to the one below. Tomorrow, I must see inside." He paused, tapping his pen against his lips. And the family. They are actors in a play they did not write. But who is the playwright? Sleep did not come easily. The manor groaned around him, its timbers whispering secrets. Poirot lay awake, his little gray cells humming. The scream had been a warning or a plea. Either way, it confirmed his purpose. Vane Manor held a truth that demanded to be uncovered. He closed his eyes, vowing to unlock the room's secrets by morning, even if it meant prying open the family's lies one by one. The next day dawned gray, the fog thicker than before. Poirot dressed meticulously, his suit a shield against the manor's gloom. At breakfast, the mood was strained. Lady Evelyn was absent, citing a headache. Edgar picked at his food, his eyes darting to Poirot, as if expecting an accusation. Miss Gray was quieter than the night before, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Poirot sipped his tea, observing, "A restless night, Nan. I heard a disturbance. A scream, perhaps." Edgar's fork clattered. "A scream. You must be mistaken. The wind plays tricks here." Miss Gray's lips parted, but she said nothing. Poirot smiled faintly. "The wind, you say? Yet it sounded so human, from the third floor, I believe." Edgar's face paled. "The third floor is unused. Old servants' quarters, nothing more." "Then you will not mind if I explore?" Poirot asked, his tone deceptively mild. Edgar hesitated, then nodded. "If you must, but there's nothing to see." After breakfast, Harrow led Poirot to the third floor. The butler's silence was oppressive, his eyes avoiding the locked door. "This hasn't been opened in years," Harrow said, producing a ring of keys. "No point in it." Poirot watched as Harrow fumbled with the lock, the key turning with a reluctant groan. The door swung open, revealing a room frozen in time. Dust coated a narrow bed, a cracked mirror, and a wardrobe with one door ajar. A faded shawl lay draped over a chair, its edges frayed. The air was stale, heavy with that same sweet scent Poirot had detected the night before. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning every detail. The floorboards creaked underfoot, and he noted a faint outline in the dust, a rectangle, as if a small box had recently been removed. The shuttered window was nailed shut, but a sliver of light revealed scratches on the sill, fresh and deep. Someone has been here, Poirot thought. Recently. Harrow lingered in the doorway, his hands clasped tightly. As I said, nothing here. Poirot turned, his gaze piercing. Yet someone screamed, Monsieur Harrow, and this room. It feels alive with secrets. Harrow's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Poirot knelt by the bed, peering underneath. A glint caught his Aja hairpin, delicate and silver, half buried in the dust. He pocketed it discreetly, his mind turning. Clara's, or another's. As they descended, Poirot's thoughts churned. The scream, the locked room, the hairpin pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit. The Vane family was hiding something, and the manor itself seemed complicit, its walls whispering of betrayal. He resolved to press harder, starting with Miss Grey. Her hesitation at dinner suggested knowledge, perhaps fear. She is the key, he thought, but to what lock? The afternoon brought a rare break in the fog, and Poirot took the opportunity to explore the manor's grounds. The gardens were overgrown, roses choking on thorns. A stone fountain, dry and cracked, stood at the center, its statue of a weeping woman eerily lifelike. Poirot paused, noting the statue's eyes carved to seem hollow, as if watching. He found Miss Grey near a hedge maze, her sketchbook open to a drawing of the manor. Her pencil moved swiftly, capturing the shuttered window with uncanny precision. You have an artist's eye, Mademoiselle Poirot said. Approaching, she started, closing the book. It's just a hobby. The manor, it's compelling. Compelling, yes, Poirot agreed, and full of mysteries. Like the scream last night, you heard it, I think. Her eyes flickered, but she nodded. I thought it was a dream. This place. It plays with your mind. Or someone plays with us. Poirot said softly. Tell me, mademoiselle, what did Clara seek in this manor? You said she was curious about what Miss Grey's fingers tightened on her sketchbook. Old stories. Legends about the Vanes. She thought there was truth in them. Legends. Poirot's voice was gentle, encouraging. She hesitated, then spoke in a rush about a secret society. Something tied to the manor's founding. Clara found papers in the library, old letters, maps. She said they pointed to something hidden. Here. Poirot's mustache twitched. And where are these papers now? Gone, Miss Grey said, her voice barely audible. She hid them, then disappeared. Before Poirot could press further, a shadow fell across them. Edgar stood at the maze's entrance, his face taut. Mother wants you inside. Lila, now. Miss Grey nodded, hurrying away. Edgar's eyes lingered on Poirot, a mix of fear and defiance. You're stirring things up. Monsieur Poirot, be careful. Old houses don't like being disturbed. Poirot smiled thinly. And yet, Monsieur Edgar, it is my habit to disturb, especially when the truth is at stake. That evening, Poirot sat in his room, the hairpin on the table before him. It was delicate, engraved with a tiny rosa match for the one in Clara's portrait at the inn. She was here, he thought. But why lock her room? And why the scream? He opened his notebook, adding, Miss Grey knows of Clara's research, a secret society. Edgar afraid. But of what? The locked room, Clara's, but tampered with. The scream a warning, or a trap. He closed the book, his resolve hardening. Tomorrow, he would confront Lady Evelyn about the room. And he would find those papers Miss Grey mentioned, even if it meant tearing the manor apart. That as he blew out the candle, the manor seemed to sigh, its shadows deepening. Poirot lay back, his mind a whirl of possibilities. Vane Manor was a chessboard, and he was no pawn. The game is afoot, he thought, and Hercule Poirot does not lose. Chapter 3. The locked doors riddled the morning air in Blackthorn Hollow, hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine, the fog from the previous night lingering like a reluctant guest. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed despite the rustic surroundings, stood at the edge of Vane Manor's sprawling lawn, his sharp eyes scanning the mist-shrouded silhouette of the ancient house. The manor loomed like a brooding sentinel, its Gothic arches and ivy-clad walls whispering secrets older than the village itself. His gloved fingers adjusted his hat as he contemplated the task ahead, penetrating the mystery of the locked room. Dinner at Vane Manor. The previous night had been a study in veiled hostility. Lady Evelyn's imperious gaze, Edgar's nervous reticence, and Miss Lila Gray's guarded glances had all been noted by Poirot's meticulous mind. The scream that had pierced the night, only to vanish as he reached its source, had cemented his resolve. There was something within those walls, something the Vane family wished to keep hidden, and Poirot, with his little gray cells buzzing, was determined to uncover it. He returned to the manor shortly after breakfast, his polished shoes clicking on the cobblestone path. The butler, a gaunt man named Harrow, with eyes like chipped flint, greeted him at the door with a bow that was more mechanical than welcoming. "Monsieur Poirot, Lady Evelyn is indisposed this morning," Harrow intoned, his voice as flat as the fog outside. "But Master Edgar is in the library. Should you wish to speak with him?" "Mercy, Harrow," Poirot replied, his mustache twitching with a faint smile. "It is Master Edgar I seek." "The library, you say? Bond, lead the way." The library was a cavernous room, its walls lined with leather-bound tomes that smelled of age and secrets. Edgar Vane sat hunched over a desk, his pale fingers clutching a fountain pen as he scribbled in a ledger. He looked up as Poirot entered, his eyes darting nervously. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice strained. "I didn't expect you so early." "Early, mon ami. For a mystery, there is no hour too soon," Poirot said, his tone light but his gaze piercing. "I wish to discuss the locked room, the one no one speaks of, yet everyone avoids. It is, I think, central to the disappearance of Mademoiselle Clara Vane." Edgar's pen froze mid-stroke, ink blotting the page. "The locked room," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It's just a storage room. Clara's old things, nothing more." Poirot tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. "Storage, you say? Yet it is locked, with a key none seem to possess, and its mention causes such unease." Nan, Monsieur Edgar, I think it is more than storage. I think it holds the key to your sister's fate. Will you open it for me?" Edgar's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening around the pen. For a moment, Poirot thought he might refuse, but then the young man sighed, his shoulders slumping. "Very well," he muttered, "but you'll find nothing but dust and memories." They traversed the manor's labyrinthine corridors, passing portraits of stern-faced, vain ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow them. The locked room was on the second floor, its heavy oak door unadorned, save for a tarnished brass keyhole. Edgar produced a key from his pocket, its edges worn smooth by time. "This was Clara's room," he said, his voice hollow. Before she left, the door creaked open, revealing a chamber frozen in time. A four-poster bed stood against one wall, its canopy draped in faded silk. A vanity held a silver hairbrush and a scattering of pins, as if Clara had stepped out only moments ago. A wardrobe loomed in the corner, its doors ajar, revealing dresses that swayed like ghosts in the draft. And on a small writing desk, a leather-bound diary lay closed, its pages yellowed but intact. Poirot stepped inside, his senses alert. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, his fingers brushing the desk's surface. "This is no mere storage. This is a shrine to Mademoiselle Clara." He turned to Edgar, who lingered in the doorway, his face pale. "Why has this room been sealed? What do you fear it will reveal?" Edgar's eyes flickered to the diary, then away. "It's just painful," he said. "To see her things, to remember." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Painful, perhaps, but I think there is more. This diary, for instance." He lifted it, noting the faint embossing of Clara's initials on the cover. "May I?" Edgar hesitated, then nodded. "It's nonsense, mostly. Clara loved her puzzles and codes. You won't make sense of it." "We shall see," Poirot said, tucking the diary under his arm. "I have a fondness for puzzles myself." Back at the inn, Poirot settled into a quiet corner of the common room, the diary open before him. The pages were filled with Clara's elegant script, but much of it was written in a cipherous series of numbers and symbols that danced across the lines like a secret language. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he traced the patterns, his mind already at work. A substitution cipher, perhaps, he mused, his pencil tapping the page, or something more complex. But Mademoiselle Clara, you were clever, n'est-ce pas? After an hour of meticulous work, he cracked the first entry. The words emerged like a whisper from the grave. October 12th, I cannot shake the feeling of being watched. Not by eyes I can see, but by something else. The manor is alive with whispers, and I fear I have stumbled upon something I was not meant to know. The watcher is here, in these walls, and I am not safe. Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. A watcher, he said softly. Not a person, perhaps, but a presence, or a secret, guarded jealously. He closed the diary, his resolve hardening. Clara had been afraid, and her fear had driven her to hide her thoughts in code. Whatever she had discovered, it was tied to the manor and, perhaps, to the strange lights the groundskeeper had mentioned. That afternoon, Poirot sought out the groundskeeper, a wiry man named Amos, with a face weathered by years of wind and suspicion. He found him near the stables, sharpening a scythe with deliberate strokes. Monsieur Amos, Poirot began, his tone genial. A word, if you please. I am told you have seen unusual things in the woods near the manor. Amos's hand paused, the scythe glinting in the weak sunlight. Told you that, did they? He said, his voice gruff. Village talk, that's all. Nothing to it. Yet you mentioned lights. Poirot pressed, his eyes fixed on the man's weathered face. Flickering in the woods, at night, a curious phenomenon, none perhaps tied to Mademoiselle Clara's disappearance. Amos's gaze darted to the side, as if expecting the fog to conceal an eavesdropper. I don't know nothing about Miss Clara, he said. But the woods, they ain't right. Seen lights, aye, like candles, but moving, near the old chapel, up the hill. Ain't nobody goes there, not since the old days. The old chapel, Poirot repeated, his interest piqued. And what is its history? This chapel? Amos shrugged, his eyes narrowing. Just stories. Folks say it was used by strange folk, long ago. Cults, maybe. Don't know more'n that, and don't want to. Merci, Monsieur Amos, Poirot said, tipping his hat. You have been most illuminating. As dusk fell, the fog thickened, wrapping Blackthorn Hollow in a shroud of gray. Poirot stood at his window at the inn, his eyes fixed on the dark line of trees beyond the village. The groundskeeper's words echoed in his mind. Candles, but moving. He had seen such lights himself the previous night, a faint glow flickering through the mist. It was no coincidence, he was certain. Clara's diary, the locked room, the lights in the woods, they were threads in the same tapestry, and he would unravel it. He donned his coat, slipping a small flashlight into his pocket. The innkeeper, a stout woman named Mrs. Hobb, eyed him warily as he passed through the common room. Going out, sir? She asked, her hands twisting in her apron. Fog's thick tonight. Ain't safe. Safety, madame, is a luxury I cannot afford, Poirot replied, his tone light but firm. There is a truth to be found, and I shall find it. The woods were a labyrinth of shadows, the fog weaving through the trees like a living thing. Poirot moved with care, his flashlight casting a narrow beam that barely pierced the gloom. The air was cold, carrying the faint scent of decay, and something else, something metallic, like old blood. His heart beat steadily, his senses attuned to every rustle and snap. After what felt like hours, he glimpsed a faint glow ahead, flickering, like a willow. The wispy quickened his pace, his shoes sinking into the damp earth. The light grew brighter, guiding him to a clearing where a crumbling stone structure stood the old chapel Amos had spoken of. Its windows were dark, but a soft glow emanated from within, casting eerie shadows on the moss-covered walls. Poirot approached cautiously, his hand on the flashlight. The chapel's door was ajar, its hinges rusted and groaning as he pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of wax and dust. A single candle burned on a makeshift altar, its flame casting dancing shadows across the walls. The stone was etched with symbol spirals, crosses, and strange angular shapes. that seemed to writhe in the flickering light. "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered, his eyes tracing the patterns. They were not random. They spoke of intent, of ritual. He stepped closer, his flashlight sweeping the room. In the corner, a trapdoor was partially concealed by a pile of broken pews. His pulse quickened. This was no mere chapel, it was a place of secrets. Perhaps the very heart of Clara's mystery. Before he could investigate further, a shadow moved in the periphery of his vision. He turned, his flashlight catching a glimpse of a cloaked figure darting through a side door. "Arthez," Poirot called, but the figure was gone, swallowed by the fog. He gave chase, his heart pounding, but the woods were a maze, and the figure vanished like a phantom. Returning to the chapel, Poirot examined the trapdoor. It was locked, its mechanism rusted but intact. He would need tools to open it, tools he did not have tonight. But near the altar, he found something else, a torn scrap of paper, its edges singed. The writing was faint, but legible. The order will rise again. The vein blood is the key. Poirot pocketed the fragment, his mind racing. An order, a secret society, perhaps tied to the Vane family. Clara had stumbled upon it, and it had cost her dearly. He left the chapel, the candles glow fading behind him as he slipped back into the fog. At the inn, he sat by the fire, the torn letter in his hand. The villagers were asleep, the manor silent, but Poirot's mind was alive with possibilities. The locked room, the diary, the chapel, the cloaked figure, they were pieces of a puzzle, and he was close to seeing its shape. But danger lurked, too. The figure in the woods had seen him, and Poirot knew he was being watched. He rose, his resolve unshaken. Tomorrow, he would return to the chapel, armed with tools and knowledge. The lights in the woods had led him to a truth, and he would follow it to its end, no matter the cost. The chapter of Clara Vane's disappearance was far from closed, but Hercule Poirot was determined to write its final lines. Chapter 4. The Phantom in the Woods. The fog clung to Blackthorn Hollow, like a jealous lover, its tendrils curling through the gnarled branches of the ancient woods that bordered Vane Manor. Hercule Poirot, his coat buttoned tightly against the damp chill, moved with deliberate steps, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the sodden earth. The flickering glow he had glimpsed from his window at the manor, brief, elusive, like a willow, the wisp had drawn him here, into the heart of the forest, where secrets seemed to whisper from every shadow. His mind, sharp as ever, churned with the puzzle of Clara Vane's disappearance. The coded diary, and the villagers' guarded silences. The lights in the woods were no mere coincidence. They were a thread in the tapestry of this mystery, and Poirot intended to tug until it unraveled. The air was heavy with the scent of moss and decay, and the distant hoot of an owl punctuated the silence. Poirot's mustache twitched as he scanned the darkness, his eyes catching the faint pulse of light ahead. It was no lantern or torch. It was too erratic, too ethereal, dancing like a flame caught in a draft. He adjusted his grip on his walking stick, its silver handle cool against his palm, and pressed forward, his senses attuned to every rustle and snap in the underbrush. The villagers' tales of strange lights had been dismissed as superstition, but Poirot knew better than to ignore the inexplicable. In his experience, the inexplicable often had a very human explanation. The trees parted abruptly, revealing a clearing dominated by a crumbling stone structure, an abandoned chapel, its spire jagged against a moonless sky. The light emanated from within, seeping through cracked, stained glass windows that cast fractured colors onto the ground. Poirot paused, his breath a faint mist in the cold air, and considered his approach. The chapel was no place of worship. Now, it reeked of neglect and something darker, a purpose forgotten by time, but perhaps not by those who still walked these woods. He circled the building, noting the ivy that clawed at its walls and the heavy iron door, slightly ajar. The light pulsed again, stronger now, and Poirot's curiosity overcame his caution. He slipped inside, his footsteps muffled on the moss-covered floor. The interior was a cavern of shadows, the air thick with the musty scent of old stone and wax. Candles, dozens of them, burned in uneven clusters, their flames casting wild patterns on the walls. The altar, long stripped of its sanctity, was littered with strange artifacts, a rusted dagger, a cracked chalice, and symbols etched into the stone. Their curves and angles unfamiliar yet unsettlingly deliberate. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he approached the altar, his gloved fingers tracing the symbols. They were not random vandalism, but a script of sorts, perhaps a cipher or a ritual mark. His mind catalogued them, cross-referencing with the cryptic entries in Clara's diary. The heiress had feared an unseen watcher, and now, standing in this forsaken place, Poirot felt the weight of unseen eyes. He turned sharply, his stick raised, but the chapel was empty, save for the flickering candles. A faint scrape echoed from the far corner, where a pile of debris concealed a trapdoor, its edges barely visible in the dim light. Poirot knelt, his knees protesting the cold stone, and examined the trapdoor's rusted hinges. It was old, but recently disturbed. The dust around it was smudged, as if someone had opened it within the last day. He pried it open with effort, revealing a narrow, stone staircase, descending into darkness. The air that wafted up was stale, tinged with the metallic temps of earth and something else, something faintly organic, like the breath of a living thing. Before he could decide whether to descend, a shadow flitted across the chapel's entrance. Poirot froze, his heart steady but his senses razor-sharp. A cloaked figure, swift and silent, darted past the doorway and into the woods. The movement was too quick to discern details, but the figure's haste betrayed fear or guilt. Poirot hesitated only a moment before giving chase, his nimble steps belying his fastidious appearance. The fog swallowed the figure's outline, but Poirot followed the sound of snapping twigs and rustling leaves, his mind racing to piece together the implications. Who would flee from a derelict chapel in the dead of night, and why? The chase led him deeper into the woods, where the trees grew denser, their branches interlocking like skeletal fingers. The ground was treacherous, slick with mud and roots, but Poirot pressed on, guided by the faint sounds of flight. The figure was fast, but Poirot was relentless, his determination fueled by the certainty that this phantom held a key to Clara's fate. At last, the sound ceased, and Poirot stopped, his breath steady, despite the exertion. The fog was thicker here, a white veil that obscured all but the nearest trees. He listened, straining for any hint of movement, but the woods were silent, as if holding their breath. Then, at his feet, he spotted a torn scrap of paper, half buried in the mud. He retrieved it carefully, holding it to the faint light of his pocket torch. The paper was brittle, its edges singed, but the words were legible. The order must protect the relic at all costs. The Vane bloodline cannot be trusted. The handwriting was hurried, the ink smudged, but the mention of an order and the Vane family sent a jolt through Poirot's mind. A secret society, perhaps, one tied to the manor and Clara's disappearance. He pocketed the fragment, his thoughts whirling. The chapel, the symbols, the cloaked figure pointed to a conspiracy older and deeper than he had anticipated. Returning to the chapel, Poirot re-examined the trapdoor. The staircase descended into a void, and without proper equipment, exploration would be reckless. Yet the discovery of the letter fragment and the fleeing figure confirmed his suspicions. The woods were no mere backdrop to the mystery, but its crucible. He closed the trapdoor, marking its location in his mind, and extinguished the candles to conceal his presence. The manor awaited, and with it, the Vane family, whose secrets were beginning to unravel like threads from a frayed tapestry. Back at Vane Manor, the atmosphere was as stifling as the fog outside. The grand hall, with its towering portraits and flickering chandeliers, seemed to watch Poirot as he entered, his shoes leaving faint mud tracks on the polished floor. Lady Evelyn Vane sat by the fire, her face a mask of aristocratic composure, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease as Poirot approached. Edgar, her son, lounged in a chair, his fingers drumming nervously on the armrest, while Miss Lila Gray, the governess, stood by a window, her silhouette rigid against a fogged glass. "Monsieur Poirot," Lady Evelyn said, her voice smooth as velvet but edged with steel, "you return rather late. The woods are no place for a gentleman at this hour. Poirot smiled, his mustache curling slightly. The woods, Lady Evelyn, are full of surprises. One might say they hold secrets as old as this manor. Her eyes narrowed, but she said nothing, gesturing for him to sit. Edgar shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting to his mother. Leela remained silent, her fingers tightening on the curtain. Poirot chose his words carefully, aware that every syllable could provoke a reaction or a revelation. "I have seen lights," he said, his tone light but probing. "In the woods, near an old chapel. Most curious, Nan. Perhaps one of you knows of this place." The room stilled. Edgar's drumming ceased, and Leela's breath caught audibly. Lady Evelyn's expression remained impassive, but her knuckles whitened on her chair. "An old chapel," she said, her voice too casual. "A relic of the estate, long abandoned. Surely it is of no interest to you, Monsieur Poirot." "On the contrary," Poirot replied, leaning forward, his eyes gleaming. "Abandoned places often hold the most illuminating secrets. Tell me, Lady Evelyn, what do you know of an order connected to your family?" The word struck like a stone in a still pond. Edgar flinched. Lila turned sharply from the window, and Lady Evelyn's composure cracked for a fraction of a second. "An order," she repeated, her tone dismissive but strained. "You speak in riddles, monsieur. This is a respectable family, not the stuff of Gothic novels." "Respectable," Poirot said, his voice deceptively mild. "Yet, respectability often cloaks the most intriguing truths. Clara Vane, I am told, was curious about her family's history, perhaps too curious." Edgar stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is absurd. Clara ran off, as I've said. She was always fanciful, chasing ghost stories. You're wasting your time, Poirot." Poirot's gaze flicked to Edgar, noting the sweat on his brow despite the cool room. "Ghost stories, Monsieur Edgar, or truths dressed as such. I find it curious that a young woman vanishes and no one speaks of her without fear. Even you, I think, are not so calm as you wish to appear." Edgar opened his mouth, then closed it, his jaw tight. Lila stepped forward, her voice low but firm. "Monsieur Poirot, you must understand, Clara was troubled. She spoke of things that made no sense. Shadows, watchers, old legends. We thought her unwell." Poirot's eyes softened, but his mind remained sharp. "And yet, Mademoiselle Gray, her diary suggests otherwise. She was methodical, precise, not the ravings of a troubled mind, but the notes of one who sought truth. Tell me, did she ever speak of a chapel, or perhaps a relic?" Leela paled, her lips parting, but Lady Evelyn interrupted, her voice cutting through the tension. "Enough, Monsieur Poirot. You are a guest in my home, and I will not have my family interrogated like common criminals. Clara's absence is a tragedy, but it is not your mystery to solve." Poirot inclined his head, the picture of courtesy. "A tragedy, oui. And yet, I am Hercule Poirot, and mysteries, they call to me. I will find the truth, Lady Evelyn, with or without your assistance." He rose, bowing slightly, and left the room, feeling their eyes on his back. The letter fragment burned in his pocket, a tangible link to the enigma. The Vane family was hiding something, perhaps everything, and the chapel was the key. But the cloaked figure, the symbols, the order, these were pieces of a puzzle that stretched beyond the manor, into the heart of Blackthorn Hollow itself. The next morning, Poirot returned to the village, seeking the groundskeeper, Amos Black, who had first mentioned the strange lights. Amos was a wiry man, with eyes like flint, his hands calloused from years of tending the manor's grounds. He was splitting wood behind the inn when Poirot approached, his axe pausing mid-swing as he spotted the detective. "Morning, sir," Amos said gruffly, wiping sweat from his brow. "Didn't expect to see you out here after last night's wanderings." Poirot's mustache twitched. "You are observant, Monsieur Black. You knew I was in the woods." Then, Amos shrugged, his eyes guarded. "Folks talk. Fog carries sound. What's a fancy man like you doing chasing lights in the dark?" "Chasing truth," Poirot replied, his tone light but his gaze piercing. You spoke of lights in the woods. Tell me, what else have you seen? Or perhaps, what have you done?" Amos's axe clattered to the ground, his face darkening. "You accusing me of something, sir?" "Not accusing," Poirot said smoothly, inquiring. "The chapel in the woods, it is not as abandoned as it seems. Candles burn, symbols mark the walls, and someone cloaked fled from me last night. You know these woods, Monsieur Black. Who might such a person be?" Amos's jaw worked silently, his eyes darting to the trees, as if expecting the fog to part and reveal answers. "I don't meddle in what don't concern me," he said at last. "The chapel's been cursed since I was a boy. Folks say it's haunted, but I don't hold with ghosts. Still, I've seen things. Shadows moving where they shouldn't. And that vain Lothair, not right, sir. Never have been." Poirot leaned closer, his voice low. "Shadows, you say, or perhaps an order, guarding something precious. A relic, maybe." Amos froze, his breath hitching. "You know more than's good for you," he muttered, then grabbed his axe and resumed chopping, the blows sharp and final. "Stay out of the woods, sir. For your own sake." Poirot stepped back, satisfied. Amos knew more than he admitted, and his fear was a clue in itself. The groundskeeper's warning echoed Clara's diarrhea watcher, a presence, a secret society, tied to the Vane family. The letter fragment mentioned an order protecting a relic, and the chapel's symbols suggested a ritualistic purpose. But what relic, and why had Clara's curiosity threatened it? That afternoon, Poirot visited the village's only bookshop, a cramped shop with sagging shelves and the faint smell of mildew. The owner, Mrs. Harrow, was a bespectacled woman with a sharp tongue and sharper memory. She eyed Poirot warily as he inquired about local history, particularly legends tied to the manor. "You're poking into things best left alone," she said, pushing her glasses up her nose. "The Vanes have been here since the Normans, and they've always had peculiarities. Talk of cults, secret meetings, all nonsense, of course, but there's a book old rare about the manor's founding. Might interest you." She retrieved a leather-bound volume, its pages yellowed and brittle. "Chronicles of Blackthorn Hollow," it read, authored by a long-dead vicar. Poirot purchased it, his fingers itching to explore its secrets. Back at the inn, he pored over the book, its dense prose revealing a chilling tale. Centuries ago, the Vane family had been linked to a secretive group called the Order of the Saffron Veil, guardians of a relic said to hold unearthly power. The relic's nature was vague, perhaps a gem, perhaps a talisman, but its theft had sparked a series of vanishings, each tied to the manor and the chapel in the woods. Poirot's pulse quickened. The letter fragment, the chapel's symbols, Clara's diary all pointed to the Order's revival. But who was the cloaked figure? Edgar, with his nervous demeanor, Lila hiding more than she admitted, or Lady Evelyn, whose composure masked a calculating mind. And where was Clara, if she was still alive? That night, Poirot returned to the chapel, armed with a lantern and a small notebook to sketch the symbols. The fog was thinner, the air sharper, as if the woods themselves were watching. Inside, the candles were gone, the altar bare, as if someone had erased their traces. But the trapdoor remained, its hinges gleaming faintly in the lantern's light. Poirot hesitated, weighing the risk. The staircase beckoned, a descent into the unknown. But the cloaked figure's flight suggested danger lurked below. Instead, he focused on the symbols, sketching each one with precision. They formed a pattern, a spiral that seemed to pulse with meaning as he worked. A faint sound, a low, rhythmic chant, drifted from the woods outside. Poirot extinguished his lantern and crept to the doorway, his heart steady but his senses alert. The chant grew clearer, a single voice, male intoning words in a language he didn't recognize. Not Latin, not French, but something older, like the earth itself, speaking. The voice stopped abruptly, and Poirot caught a glimpse of movement, a cloaked figure. Not fleeing this time, but standing still, as if waiting. Poirot's instinct urged caution, but his curiosity was stronger. He stepped into the clearing, his voice calm but commanding. "You there? Show yourself. Hercule Poirot wishes to speak." The figure turned, its face hidden by the hood, and for a moment Poirot thought it would speak. Then, with a rustle of fabric, it vanished into the fog, leaving only silence. Poirot cursed softly in French, his mind racing. The figure knew he was here, knew he was close. The game had changed. Back at the manor, Poirot concealed the letter fragment and his sketches in a hidden pocket of his suitcase. The Vane family, the order, the chapel all, were pieces of a puzzle that was both ancient and alive. Clara's disappearance was no simple abduction, but a thread in a web of secrets, and the cloaked figure was its weaver. Poirot lay awake, his little gray cells humming, plotting his next move. The woods held answers, and he would return, armed, not just with a lantern, but with the certainty that the truth, however dark, could not elude Hercule Poirot. Chapter 5. The Governess's Confession. The air in Vane Manor hung heavy with secrets, the kind that clung to the walls like damp moss and whispered through the cracks of ancient oak. Hercule Poirot, his mustache impeccably trimmed despite the late hour, stood in the grand library, his sharp eyes scanning the towering shelves. The room was a labyrinth of leather-bound tomes, their spines cracked with age, and the faint scent of dust mingled with the sharper tang of old wax from candles long extinguished. The dinner at Vane Manor had left him with a puzzle. Clara Vane's disappearance, the locked room, the scream that had pierced the night, and now the enigmatic governess, Miss Lila Gray, whose guarded demeanor intrigued him most. Poirot had observed Lila throughout the evening. Her movements were precise, her words measured, yet her eyes, those pale green orbs, flickered with something unspoken, fear, perhaps, or knowledge. She had sat at the far end of the dining table, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun, her gray dress blending into the shadows of the room. When Lady Evelyn had deflected questions about Clara, Lila's fingers had tightened around her fork, a subtle tell that Poirot's little gray cells had duly noted. Now, as the manor settled into an uneasy silence, Poirot had requested a private word with Lila in the library. The other lady, Evelyn, with her imperious glare, Edgar, with his sullen reticence, had retired, leaving the two alone. The fire in the hearth cast long shadows, dancing across the walls like specters of the manor's past. Poirot adjusted his cufflinks' movements deliberate, and turned to Lila, who stood near a window, her silhouette framed by the moon's pale glow, filtering through the fog outside. "Mademoiselle Gray," he began, his voice smooth as polished glass, "I find myself curious about your role in this household. A governess, oui, but not for children, as there are none here. What, then, is your purpose in Vane Manor?" Lila's posture stiffened, but she did not turn to face him. "I assist Lady Evelyn with correspondence and manage the household's affairs," she said, her tone clipped. "It is not unusual for a governess to take on such duties in a home like this." Poirot tilted his head, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And yet, mademoiselle, you seem unsettled." At dinner, when the subject of Mademoiselle Clara Vane arose, your composure faltered, a mere flicker, but enough for Hercule Poirot to notice. "You know something of her disappearance, do you not?" Lila's shoulders tensed, and she finally turned, her face half-lit by the firelight. "You're mistaken, Monsieur Poirot. I know nothing more than the others. Clara vanished months ago. It's a tragedy, but I have no answers." Poirot took a step closer, his polished shoes silent on the thick rug. "Come now, mademoiselle, the truth is a delicate thing, but it cannot hide from Poirot. Your eyes betray you. They speak of a burden, a secret you carry. Tell me, what did you see or hear before Clara vanished?" Lila's lips parted, then closed, as if wrestling with an invisible chain. She glanced toward the door, ensuring they were alone, before speaking in a low voice. "You're relentless, aren't you? Very well. I saw something, but I swore I'd never speak of it. Not here, not in this house." Poirot gestured to a pair of armchairs by the fire. "Sit, mademoiselle. Speak freely. Hercule Poirot is a man of discretion, and your words will remain between us." Lila hesitated, then sank into the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Poirot settled opposite her, his posture upright, his gaze unwavering. The fire crackled a counterpoint to the silence that stretched between them. It was the night before Clara disappeared. Leela began, her voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't sleep. The manor has a way of keeping you awake, as if the walls themselves hum with secrets. I was in the east wing, near Clara's room, when I heard voices. Angry voices. Clara was arguing with someone, a man, I think, though I couldn't see his face. The door was ajar, and I caught only fragments. She said something about the truth and exposing them. He told her to stop, that she was meddling in things she didn't understand. Poirot leaned forward, his fingers steepled. This man, mademoiselle, did you recognize his voice? Lila shook her head. No, it was too muffled. But it wasn't Edgar or any of the staff, I know. A stranger, perhaps, or someone who doesn't belong here. I wanted to intervene, but I was afraid. I returned to my room and locked the door. The next morning, Clara was gone. Poirot's mind raced, piecing together the fragments. A stranger in the manor, an argument, a disappearance. But there was more. Leela's hesitation suggested deeper knowledge. And what, mademoiselle, was Clara researching? You mentioned the truth. What truth did she seek? Lila's eyes darted to the shelves, as if expecting the books to answer for her. Clara was obsessed with the manor's history. She spent hours in this library, poring over old records, letters, anything she could find. She told me once that Vane Manor was built on lies, that the family's wealth came from something dark. She mentioned a cult group tied to the manor centuries ago. I thought it was nonsense, the ramblings of an overactive imagination, but she was convinced it still existed. A cult. Poirot's voice was sharp, his interest piqued. And what evidence did she have? She found papers, Leela said, her voice trembling. Old journals, hidden in a false drawer in this very room. They described rituals, disappearances. A group called the Order of the Saffron Veil. Clara believed they were still active, that someone in the village or the family was involved. She said she was close to proving it. Poirot's mind whirred. The coded diary he'd found in the locked room, the strange lights in the woods, and now this talk of a cult. The pieces were forming a pattern, but the picture remained elusive. He rose, pacing slowly before the fire. Mademoiselle, why did you not speak of this sooner? To the police, perhaps. Lila's laugh was bitter. The police. Blackthorn Hollow is a closed circle. Monsieur, the villagers protect their own, and the Vanes, they have influence. I'm an outsider here, a hired hand. If I spoke out, I'd be dismissed or worse. Before Poirot could press further, a sudden gust rattled the windows, and the room plunged into darkness. The fire's glow dimmed as the power failed, leaving only the faint moonlight to illuminate Leela's startled face. A low hum, almost imperceptible, vibrated through the floorboards, as if the manor itself were stirring. What was that? Lila whispered, her voice tight with fear. Poirot held up a hand, his senses alert. Calm yourself, mademoiselle. It is merely the storm, or perhaps the manor's old bones creaking. Stay here. He moved to the window, peering into the fog. The grounds were a sea of gray, the trees indistinct shapes in the haze, but there near the edge of the lawn a faint flicker, like a candle's flame, winked and vanished. Poirot's pulse quickened. The lights in the woods, perhaps, or something closer. Returning to Leela, he found her clutching the armrests, her knuckles white. Mademoiselle, you mentioned the library. Show me where Clara found these journals. Lila hesitated, then stood, her movements jerky. She led him to a corner of the library, where a heavy oak desk stood beneath a portrait of a stern-faced Vane ancestor. Here, she said, pointing to the desk's lower drawer. She showed me once. There's a false bottom. Poirot knelt, his nimble fingers probing the drawer. It slid open easily, revealing a stack of mundane ledgers. But beneath his touch found a slight ridge. With a gentle press, a panel clicked, and a hidden compartment sprang open. Inside lay a single object, an ancient medallion, its surface etched with a swirling symbol, saffron-colored veil entwined with thorns. Poirot held it up, the firelight glinting off its edges. Monsieur, he murmured. What have we here? Leela gasped. That's it. Clara showed me a sketch of that symbol. She said it was the mark of the order. Before Poirot could respond, a sharp crack echoed through the library, like wood splintering. He spun toward the sound, his hand instinctively reaching for the medallion, which he slipped into his pocket. The noise had come from the far wall, where a row of bookshelves loomed. Moving swiftly, Poirot ran his fingers along the shelf, searching for a catch or lever. His touch found a slight indentation behind a copy of Paradise Lost. A press, a click, and a section of the shelf swung inward, revealing a narrow passage cloaked in darkness. Lila stepped back, her breath hitching. "What is that?" "A secret," Mademoiselle Poirot said, his voice calm but edged with excitement. And secrets, in Hercule Poirot's experience, lead to answers. "Will you accompany me, or do you prefer to remain?" Lila's eyes flickered with fear, but she squared her shoulders. "I'll come. If Clara's alive, I owe her that much." The passage was narrow, its stone walls damp and cold. Poirot led the way, a small pocket torch illuminating the path. The air grew thicker, laced with the scent of earth and decay. The hum from earlier returned, louder now, vibrating through the stone. After a few twists, the passage opened into a small chamber, its walls lined with faded tapestries, depicting robed figures, and that same saffron veil symbol dot. In the center stood a wooden table, scattered with papers, maps, lists of names, and a single photograph. Poirot picked it up, his eyes narrowing. It showed Clara, her face pale but determined, standing before the abandoned chapel in the woods. A date on the back confirmed it was taken days before her disappearance. "This changes everything," Poirot said, his voice low. Clara was not merely researching, mademoiselle. She was documenting. She knew she was in danger. Lila's voice trembled. "Then why didn't she leave?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, turning to her, "she could not. Or perhaps she chose to stay, to fight. You, mademoiselle, have given me the key to her courage. Now, we must be her strength. Will you help me find her?" Lila met his gaze, her fear giving way to resolve. "Yes, I'll help you, Monsieur Poirot, whatever it takes." The chamber seemed to close in around them, the weight of its secrets pressing down. Poirot pocketed the photograph, his mind already racing toward the next step. The medallion, the colt, the stranger in the night teach, was a thread in a tapestry of deceit. But Hercule Poirot, with his little gray cells and an unlikely ally in Lila Gray, was determined to unravel it. As they retraced their steps through the passage, the manor groaned above them, as if protesting their intrusion. The power outage, the hidden panel, the medallion all pointed to a truth buried deep within Vane Manor's shadowed heart. Poirot's resolve hardened. The night was far from over, and the game, as always, was afoot. Chapter 6. The medallions. Curse. Hercule Poirot adjusted his perfectly knotted tie. The crisp morning air of Blackthorn Hollow, seeping through the inn's slightly ajar window. The medallion, cold and heavy in his pocket, seemed to pulse with a life of its own, its intricate engravings whispering secrets he had yet to unravel. The previous night's confrontation with Miss Lila Gray had left him with more questions than answers. But the little gray cells, as he fondly called his intellect, were already at work. Clara Vane's disappearance, the Vane family's guarded demeanor, and now this ancient relic tied to a local legend of misfortunate, was a puzzle that demanded his attention. Poirot sipped his tisane, the herbal aroma grounding him as he considered his next move. The medallion, with its cryptic spiralandi symbol, was no mere trinket. Its weight suggested antiquity, and the faint patina of age hinted at centuries of handling. Lila's reluctant admission that Clara had been researching the manor's ties to a long-forgotten cult had set Poirot's mind ablaze. A cult, a missing heiress, and a manor steeped in shadow. Blackthorn Hollow was proving to be a most intriguing stage for his talents. He rose from the creaking chair, slipping the medallion into a velvet pouch for safekeeping. The village historian, a certain Mr. Amos Finch, was his destination this morning. If anyone could shed light on the medallion's origins, it would be Finch, whose reputation for hoarding local lore preceded him. Poirot donned his overcoat. The fog outside, swirling like a living thing, and stepped into the damp streets of Blackthorn Hollow. The village was eerily quiet, the cobblestones slick with mist. A few villagers scurried past, their eyes averted, as if Poirot's presence alone stirred unease. He noted their furtive glances, storing them away in his mental ledger. The innkeeper, Mrs. Harrow, had been tight-lipped when he'd asked about the manor's history, but her nervous fidgeting suggested she knew more than she let on. The groundskeeper's warning about lights in the woods still lingered, and now, with the medallion's curse in play, Poirot felt the threads of the mystery tightening. Amos Finch's cottage sat at the edge of the village, a squat, ivy building that seemed to sag under the weight of time. The door creaked open before Poirot could knock, revealing a wiry man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose. Finch's eyes, sharp and inquisitive, studied Poirot with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "Monsieur Finch, I presume," Poirot said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "I am Hercule Poirot, and I seek your expertise on a matter of some historical significance." Finch's lips twitched, as if suppressing a smile. "I've heard of you, Mr. Poirot, the detective with the little gray cells. Come in, mind the books." The interior was a labyrinth of paper and ink. Stacks of leather-bound tomes teetered on tables, and maps of Blackthorn Hollow's ancient boundaries papered the walls. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows that danced like specters. Poirot eased into a worn armchair, declining Finch's offer of tea with a polite wave. "I am here, Monsieur Finch, to discuss a certain object." Poirot produced a velvet pouch, carefully tipping the medallion onto the table. Its surface gleamed in the firelight, the spiralandi symbol seeming to rise. "This was found in Vane Manor, and I am told it is tied to a local legend. A curse, perhaps." Finch's eyes widened, his fingers trembling as he reached for the medallion, but stopped short. "The Eye of Sorrow," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I never thought I'd see it. Where did you find this?" Poirot's mustache twitched. "That, monsieur, is part of a larger puzzle. For now, I wish to know its story. What is this Eye of Sorrow, and why does it inspire such fear?" Finch leaned back, adjusting his spectacles. "It's an old tale, Mr. Poirot, older than the village itself. 300 years ago, Blackthorn Hollow was little more than a hamlet, built around a monastery, long since crumbled. The monks, they say, were not what they seemed. They worshipped something older, something that demanded loyalty in blood." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind cataloging every word. "A cult, then?" Finch nodded, his gaze distant. "They called themselves the Order of the Spiral Eye. The medallion was their sigil, a relic said to bind its bearer to the will of their deity, thing of shadow and misfortune. The legend claims that whoever possesses the Eye of Sorrow is doomed to lose all they hold dear. Over the centuries, it's been tied to vanishings, madness, even murder. And the Vane family?" Poirot pressed, his tone gentle but insistent. "How are they connected?" Finch hesitated, his fingers drumming on the armrest. "The Vanes built their manor on the ruins of the monastery. Some say they inherited more than just land. There are stories, whispers, really, of strange rituals in the manor's cellars, of people who entered and never returned. Clara Vane, the missing heiress, was poking into those stories. She came to me months ago, asking about the order. I warned her to let it lie." Poirot leaned forward, his voice low. "And did she heed your warning, Monsieur Finch?" Finch's face darkened. "No. She was headstrong, that one. Said she'd found papers in the manor's librarial journals, maps, even a sketch of that medallion. She thought the Vanes were hiding something, maybe even profiting from it. Then she vanished." Poirot's fingers brushed the medallion, its cold surface sending a shiver through him. "You speak of vanishings. Were there others?" "Oh yes." Finch's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Every few decades, someone disappears. A merchant in 1820, a schoolteacher in 1875, a doctor in 1901, always tied to the manor, always after they've been seen near the woods or the old chapel. The villagers don't talk about it openly, but they know. They avoid the manor's hill after dark." Poirot's mind whirred, piecing together the fragments. Clara's diary had mentioned a watcher in the manor, and now Finch's tales of vanishings and a cursed relic painted a picture of a deeper, darker truth. The medallion was a key, but to what lock? "Thank you, Monsieur Finch," Poirot said, rising. "Your knowledge has been most illuminating. One final question. Where might I find more about this Order of the Spiral Eye?" Finch's eyes flicked to a dusty bookshelf. "There's an old tome, Chronicles of Blackthorn, hidden in the village archives. It's locked away in the church crypt, but the vicar might grant you access. Be careful, Mr. Poirot. The Eye of Sorrow doesn't rest easily." Poirot tipped his hat, tucking the medallion back into its pouch. "I am always careful, monsieur." The church loomed at the village's heart, its spire piercing the fog like a needle. The vicar, a gaunt man named Reverend Hale, was sweeping the steps when Poirot approached. His eyes, shadowed and wary, lingered on Poirot's immaculate attire. "Monsieur Poirot, I've heard you're stirring things up," Haley said, his tone clipped. "What brings you to my doorstep?" Poirot smiled, disarming and precise. "A simple request, Reverend. I seek access to the church crypt to consult a certain Chronicles of Blackthorn. It may hold answers to a most perplexing matter." Hale's grip tightened on the broom. "The crypt's no place for outsiders. Those records are delicate, sacred even. Yet they may hold the key to Clara Vane's fate," Poirot countered, his voice soft but unyielding. "Would you deny her justice?" Hale's jaw worked silently. Then he sighed. "Very well, follow me. But touch nothing else." The crypt was a damp, stone-walled chamber, its air thick with the scent of mildew and time. Iron-bound chests lined the walls, but Hale led Poirot to a small alcove where a single book rested on a pedestal, its leather cover cracked with age. Chronicles of Blackthorn. Poirot's gloved hands turned the pages with care, the vellum brittle under his touch. The book was a labyrinth of faded ink and cryptic annotations. Poirot's eyes scanned entries from the 1600s, detailing the monastery's fall and the Order of the Spiral Eye's rituals. One passage caught his breath. "The Eye of Sorrow, forged in shadow, binds the bearer to the watcher's will. Whoso carries it shall know loss, for the watcher sees all and spares none." A crude drawing of the medallion accompanied the text, its spiral land eye symbol unmistakable. Another entry, dated 1750, described a rebellion against the order. Villagers had stormed the monastery, burning its relic save for the medallion, which vanished. The final note, scrawled in a trembling hand, read, "The eye rests in the Vane's keep, beneath stone and sorrow. Seek the grave of the first betrayer." Poirot's pulse quickened. The grave of the first betrayer. Finch had mentioned no such grave, but the village cemetery was nearby, its ancient stones weathered by time. He closed the book, thanking Hale, with a nod, and stepped back into the fog. The cemetery was a maze of crumbling headstones, their inscriptions barely legible. Poirot moved methodically, his eyes scanning for any hint of the spiral land eye symbol. The fog thickened, muffling sound, and he felt a prickle of unease, as if unseen eyes watched from the mist. At the cemetery's edge, half hidden by brambles, he found it, a weathered gravestone marked with the symbol. The inscription read, "Elias Vane, 1623 to 1650, betrayer of the spiral." Poirot knelt, his fingers tracing the stone's edges. A faint seam suggested a hidden compartment. He pressed, and with a soft click, a panel slid open, revealing a hollow within. Inside lay a folded parchment, its edges singed. He unfolded it, carefully a sketch of the medallion, annotated with a single word, "Curse." Before he could study it further, a twig snapped behind him. Poirot spun, his hand on his cane, but the fog revealed only shadows. His heart thudded, the medallion heavy in his pocket. Someone was watching. He slipped the parchment into his coat, his mind racing. The grave's secret was a clue, but it had nearly cost him his safety. Back at the inn, Poirot spread the parchment on his table, the firelight casting eerie shapes. The sketch was detailed, showing the medallion's every curve. But the word curse was scrawled in a modern hand. Clarice, he suspected. Had she found this grave before her disappearance? And who had been in the cemetery just now? A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Mrs. Harrow, the innkeeper, stood at the door, her face pale. "Mr. Poirot, this was slipped under my door just now. It's for you." She handed him a folded note, its edges rough. Poirot unfolded it, his eyes narrowing at the scrawled message. "Leave Blackthorn Hollow, or the eye will claim you." The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the threat was clear. Someone knew he was close to the truth. He smiled faintly, tucking the note away. "Mercy, Mrs. Harrow, tell me, have you seen anyone near the inn this evening?" Her hands twisted in her apron. "No one, sir. But the village is restless. Folks say you're stirring things best left alone." Poirot's gaze softened, but his voice was firm. "The truth, madame, is never best left alone. Bonne nuit." As she left, Poirot turned back to the parchment. The grave of Elias Vane, the medallion, the order of the spiral, it all pointed to the manor. The first betrayer suggested a schism in the order, perhaps a secret buried with Elias. The chronicles had mentioned tunnels beneath the manor, and Clara's diary hinted at a watcher within its walls. The pieces were aligning, but the puzzle was far from complete. He stood, pacing the small room. The medallion's curse was a distraction, a story to frighten the superstitious. Poirot did not believe in curses, but he believed in human greed, fear, and ambition. Someone in Blackthorn Hollow was protecting a secret, and they would stop at nothing to keep it buried. The clock struck 11, its chimes heavy in the silence. Poirot's eyes drifted to the window, where the fog pressed against the glass like a living thing. The cemetery held answers, but it also held danger. A midnight visit to Elias Vane's grave was risky, but necessary. He slipped into his coat, the medallion a cold weight in his pocket, and checked his pocket watch. The night was young, and the little gray cells were restless. The cemetery was a different beast under moonlight, the fog weaving through the headstones like a serpent. Poirot moved silently, his cane tapping lightly on the path. The grave of Elias Vane loomed ahead, its spiral and eye symbol stark in the pale light. He knelt again, examining the compartment. The parchment had been a clue, but there was more to find. His fingers probed deeper, brushing against something metallic, a small key, etched with the same symbol. A rustle in the brambles froze him. He pocketed the key, his senses sharp. Footsteps, deliberate and slow, echoed in the fog. Poirot rose, his cane ready, but the figure remained hidden. "Show yourself," he called, his voice steady. "Hercule Poirot does not fear shadows." Silence answered, then a low chuckle, chilling and disembodied. "You should, detective," a voice rasped, fading into the night. The footsteps retreated, leaving Poirot alone with the grave. His heart raced, but his mind was clear. The key was a new piece, perhaps to the manor's tunnels or the locked room. The voice, unfamiliar yet menacing, confirmed his suspicions. Someone was watching, and they knew his every move. He returned to the inn, the key and medallion burning in his pocket. His resolve unshaken. In his room, Poirot examined the key under lamplight. Its craftsmanship was old, its symbol matching the medallion's. The chronicles had mentioned tunnels, and Clara's diary spoke of a watcher. The key might unlock both. He planned his next move, a return to Vane Manor, to confront Lady Evelyn and Edgar with his findings. But first, the cemetery at midnight awaited. The clock chimed 12, and Poirot stepped into the night once more. The fog thicker now, the village silent. The grave of Elias Vane held one final secret. He was sure, as he approached, a faint glow flickered in the distance. The woods, where the chapel stood. The groundskeeper's warning echoed in his mind, but Poirot pressed on. The key clutched tightly. At the grave, he searched again, his fingers finding a second compartment, smaller and hidden beneath the first. Inside was a tiny vial, its contents dark and viscous. A note tied to it read, "The Watcher's blood. Guard it, or perish." Poirot's breath caught. This was no curse. It was a warning, a relic of the Order's rituals. A shadow moved in the fog. Closer now. Poirot pocketed the vial and key, his cane raised. "Enough games," he said sharply. "Face me." The shadow paused, then melted into the mist. Poirot's eyes scanned the darkness, but he was alone again. The vial, the key, the medallion were pieces of a ritual, a secret the Vane family guarded. He returned to the inn, his mind racing. The tunnels beneath the manor were his next step, but he would need Lila's help to navigate them. As dawn broke, Poirot sat at his table. The artifacts spread before him. The medallion's curse was a myth, but its power was real power to inspire fear, to silence truth. Clara Vane had come too close, and someone had ensured her silence. The key and vial were his leverage, but the watcher in the fog was still out there, waiting. He pinned a note to Lila, requesting her aid at the manor that evening. The tunnels awaited, and with them, the truth. Poirot smiled faintly, his little gray cells humming. The game was afoot, and Hercule Poirot would not be deterred. Chapter 7. Secrets Beneath the Stone. The moon hung low over Blackthorn Hollow, its pale light barely piercing the fog that clung to the village like a shroud. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the village cemetery, his silhouette sharp against the mist, his mustache impeccably trimmed despite the hour. The night was still, save for the occasional rustle of leaves stirred by a restless wind. In his gloved hand, he clutched the map he'd uncovered in the gravestone's hidden compartment, a brittle, yellowed parchment etched with lines that promised answers beneath Vane Manor's ancient foundations. Poirot's gray eyes scanned the cemetery, where crooked headstones leaned like weary sentinels. The air carried a damp chill, and the faint scent of decay mingled with the earthiness of overturned soil. He adjusted his overcoat, its tailored lines a stark contrast to the wildness of the night, and murmured to himself, "The little gray cells, they whisper that the truth lies not in the light, but in the shadows beneath." He had come alone, as was his custom when the stakes were highest. The map, discovered hours earlier in the hollowed-out gravestone of one Abigail Vane, had revealed a network of tunnels snaking beneath the manor. Its cryptic lines and faded annotations hinted at secrets older than the village itself. Poirot's pulse quickened at the thought, not from fear, but from the thrill of a puzzle nearing its solution. Clara Vane's disappearance, the coded diary, the flickering lights in the woods, all threads leading to this moment. The gravestone, marked with the medallion's symbol, stood before him, its surface weathered but resolute. Earlier that evening, he'd pried open its hidden compartment with a penknife, revealing the map nestled within a tin box. But as he'd extracted it, the ground had shuttered a trap, perhaps designed to deter the curious. A cascade of earth had nearly buried him, and only his quick reflexes had saved him from a premature entombment. Sabotage, he was certain. Someone in Blackthorn Hollow knew he was close. Poirot knelt beside the gravestone, his lantern casting a golden glow over the mossy stone. He traced a carved symbol, a circle bisected by a jagged line, flanked by two crescent moons. It matched the medallion he'd found in the manor's hidden library panel, its weight now a familiar presence in his pocket. A symbol of power, or of fear, he mused aloud, his voice soft but precise. The answer, it waits below. He glanced at the map again, its lines converging on a point marked Subterraneum Excessum, Latin for underground entry. The entrance, according to the map, lay beneath the manor's locked room, the one Edgar Vane had so reluctantly opened. Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. The locked room, it is never just a room, n'est ce pas. The cemetery gate creaked behind him, and Poirot froze, his hand slipping to the small revolver he carried for emergencies. He turned slowly, his eyes piercing the fog. A figure emerged, a stooped, wiry man with a lantern of his own, its light swaying like a will-o'-the-wisp. It was old Tom, the village gravedigger, his face a map of wrinkles and suspicion. "Monsieur Poirot," Tom rasped, his voice like dry leaves. "What business has a fine gentleman like you in a place like this, at this hour?" Poirot rose, brushing dirt from his knees with a fastidious flick. "The business of truth, Monsieur Tom. The cemetery, It speaks when the living will not. Tom's eyes narrowed, his lantern casting harsh shadows across his face. Graves don't talk, sir, and you'd best not disturb them. Bad things happen to those who dig too deep. Poirot tilted his head, studying the man. And yet, you are here, in the dead of night. Perhaps you, too, seek answers. Tom spat into the dirt. I checked the grounds. Vandals, you know. Been trouble lately. Stones tipped, earth turned. Like someone's looking for something, or hiding something, Poirot countered, his tone light but probing. Tell me, monsieur, have you seen anyone near this gravestone before tonight? Tom hesitated, his gnarled fingers tightening on the lantern. Maybe. Shadows move quick. In the fog. Could have been that groundskeeper, Silas. Always skulking about. Poirot's mind catalogued the name. Silas, the groundskeeper who'd warned him of lights in the woods. A man with eyes that darted too quickly, a voice too eager to deflect. Mercy, Monsieur Tom, your vigilance, it is noted. Tom grunted, shuffling back into the fog. Poirot watched him go, his mind turning. The gravedigger's presence was no coincidence. Was he a guardian of secrets, or merely a witness to them? The little gray cells would decide in time. Poirot returned to the gravestone, his lantern illuminating the map's faded ink. The tunnels, it seemed, were accessible through a trapdoor in the manor's cellar, hidden beneath the locked room's floorboards. He folded the map and slipped it into his coat, his resolve hardening. The night, it is young, and the truth, it waits. The walk back to Vane Manor was a silent one, the fog swallowing his footsteps. The manor loomed ahead, its Gothic spires clawing at the sky. Its windows glowed faintly, like eyes watching his approach. Poirot entered through the servants' door, avoiding the main hall, where Lady Evelyn's portrait glared down with imperious disdain. The air inside was heavy, scented with old wood and secrets. He descended to the cellar, his lantern casting long shadows across the stone walls. Barrels of wine and crates of forgotten heirlooms lined the space, their surfaces coated in dust. The locked room was above, but the map suggested a hidden access point here. Beneath a flagstone marked with the same crescent symbol, Poirot knelt, his fingers tracing the stone's edges. It was heavier than it looked, but a faint seam betrayed its secret. He pressed his penknife into the gap, levering it upward. The stone groaned, revealing a dark shaft descending into the earth. A rusted iron ladder clung to the wall, its rungs slick with moisture. Mon Dieu, Poirot whispered, peering into the abyss. The air rising from below was cold, carrying a faint metallic timps. He adjusted his hat, secured his lantern, and began his descent, each step a deliberate act of courage. The ladder creaked under his weight, but it held at the bottom. He found himself in a narrow tunnel, its walls hewn from rough stone. The map had not lied. The passage stretched toward the manor's heart, its path marked by faint scratches in the rock, as if someone had navigated it recently. Poirot's lantern illuminated cobwebs and damp patches. But also something else. Footprints in the dust, too fresh to be ancient. He followed the tunnel, his senses alert. The air grew colder, the silence heavier. After several minutes, the passage widened into a chamber, its ceiling supported by crumbling pillars. At its center stood a stone table, etched with the same cryptic symbol as the medallion. Around it, wax drippings suggested recent candlelight, a ritual, perhaps, or a meeting. Poirot approached the table, his eyes catching a glint in the shadows. He knelt, retrieving a small object, a silver hairpin, its tip bent. It matched the description of one Clara Vane was known to wear. Mademoiselle Clara, you were here, he murmured, pocketing the find. But why? A faint sound echoed behind him, a scuff, like a boot on stone. Poirot spun, his lantern swinging. The light caught a flicker of movement at the chamber's edge, but it vanished before he could focus. His hand hovered near his revolver, his heart steady despite the darkness. Who is there? He called, his voice sharp. Show yourself, or Hercule Poirot shall find you. Silence answered, but the air felt charged, as if the walls themselves were watching. He moved toward the sound, his lantern revealing a second tunnel branching off The footprints continued deeper into the earth. He hesitated, weighing the risk. The map showed this path leading to the chapel in the woods, the same chapel where he'd seen the flickering lights. "Very well," he said, his voice a low vow. "The game, it continues." The second tunnel was narrower, its walls slick with moisture. Roots protruded like skeletal fingers, snagging at his coat. The air grew stifling, and Poirot's breath came in measured puffs. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel sloped upward, ending at a wooden trapdoor. He pushed it open, emerging into the abandoned chapel. Moonlight filtered through broken stained glass windows, casting fractured colors across the floor. The symbols he'd seen before lined the walls, the lines sharper here, as if carved with purpose. At the altar, a single candle burned, its flame steady despite the draft. Poirot approached, his eyes scanning for clues. A scrap of fabric lay caught on a splintered pure piece of gray wool, like that of a cloak. He recalled the cloak figure fleeing the chapel nights before. "You return, mon ami," he said softly, tucking the fabric away. "But for what purpose?" He circled the altar, his lantern revealing a faint outline in the floor. A second trapdoor, smaller than the first. He knelt, prying it open with his knife. Below lay a shallow compartment, empty, save for a single sheet of paper. It was a list, written in a hurried hand, naming villagers, the innkeeper, the groundskeeper, Silas, even old Tom. Beside each name was a number, some crossed out, others circled. Poirot's mind raced. A ledger, perhaps, of debts or loyalties. The numbers could be payments, dates, or something more sinister. He folded the paper carefully, his thoughts interrupted by a sudden creak from the chapel door. He doused his lantern and slipped behind a pillar. His breath held. Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. A figure entered, cloaked and hooded, carrying system, hooded, moving silently across the chapel floor. The faint glow of the candle illuminated a familiar face, Silas, the groundskeeper, his eyes glinting with unease as he scanned the room. Poirot's heart quickened, but he remained still, his mind cataloging every detail. Silas carried a small bundle, wrapped in cloth, and knelt by the altar, muttering words too low to hear. He unwrapped the bundle, revealing a small, ornate dagger, its blade etched with the crescent symbol. Silas placed it on the altar, his hands trembling, and whispered, "It's time." Poirot's mind churned. Time for what? A ritual, a sacrifice. He stepped forward, his revolver now in hand, and cleared his throat. "Monsieur Silas, you are, as they say, caught in the act." Silas spun, his face pale in the candlelight. "Monsieur Poirot, this isn't what it looks like." "Then, explain." "See, Bouplat," Poirot said, his voice calm but unyielding. "A man alone, in a ruined chapel, with a dagger and a list of names, does not inspire confidence." Silas scrambled to his feet, the dagger clattering to the floor. "I wasn't going to use it, I swear. I found it buried in the woods. I was bringing it here too, to hide it." Poirot raised an eyebrow, stepping closer. "Hide it, or use it, perhaps, as part of this ritual." He gestured to the symbols on the walls. Silas's eyes darted to the trapdoor. "You don't understand. They're watching, always watching." "Who?" Poirot pressed, his tone sharp. "The cult, the ones tied to the medallion." Silas froze, his breath ragged. "You know about that." "I know enough," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. "The medallion, the symbols, the disappearances. And now, a dagger. Speak, monsieur, or the authorities shall ask less politely." Silas's shoulders slumped, his voice barely a whisper. "They're not just stories. The Order of the Crescent, they're real. They've been here for centuries, guarding something terrible. Clara found out. She was going to expose them. And so she vanished," Poirot said, his voice low. "By your hand." "No," Silas cried, his voice breaking. "I cared for her. I tried to warn her, but she wouldn't listen. She went into the tunnels, and then she was gone." Poirot studied him, his mind turning. Silas's fear seemed genuine, but his story was thin. "This dagger," he said, picking it up, "it bears the symbol of the order. You say you found it? Silas nodded. In the woods, near the chapel. I thought, if I hid it here, they wouldn't find it. Poirot's eyes flicked to the list in his pocket. Silas's name was on it, circled, and this list, he held it up, watching some reaction. The groundskeeper's face crumpled. I don't know. I found it with the dagger. I think it's a list of their targets. Poirot's mind raced. The list, the dagger, the tunnels, all pieces of a larger puzzle. Silas was either a pawn or a liar, and Poirot's instincts leaned toward the latter. But he needed proof. You will come with me, Monsieur Silas. We shall discuss this further at the inn. Silas nodded, his eyes wide with fear. Poirot gestured toward the door, his revolver steady. As they stepped into the fog, a distant howl echoed through the woods. Not an animal, but something human, twisted with rage. Poirot's grip tightened on the revolver. The truth was close, but the danger closer. The walk back to the village was tense. Silas stumbling ahead, his breath hitching. At the inn, Poirot secured him in a locked room, promising a full interrogation come morning. He returned to his own room, the map, hairpin, fabric, and list spread before him on the table. The little gray cells worked furiously, weaving the threads together. The tunnels were the key. Clara's hairpin, the fresh footprints, the ritual chamber. They pointed to a hidden world beneath the manor, a world tied to the Order of the Crescent. The list suggested a network of conspirators, and Silas's name was among them. But was he a perpetrator or a victim? And the dagger, its purpose was unclear. But its presence was no accident. Poirot leaned back, his eyes gleaming in the lamplight. The truth, it hides beneath the stone, he murmured. And tomorrow, Hercule Poirot shall bring it to light. He extinguished the lamp, the darkness closing in. The manor's secrets were unraveling, but the game was far from over. Chapter 8. The tunnels of dread. The air in Vane Manor's underbelly was thick, not just with the damp rot of centuries, but with a tension that seemed to coil around Hercule Poirot's heart. The flickering light of his small lantern cast jagged shadows on the rough-hewn walls of the underground passage, each one a silent taunt, daring him to press deeper into the unknown. The map he'd uncovered beneath the gravestone was clutched in his gloved hand, its faded ink barely legible under the wavering flame. Yet Poirot's steps were steady, his polished shoes clicking softly against the uneven stone floor, a rhythm that anchored his racing thoughts. The tunnel stretched before him, a gaping maw of darkness that seemed to breathe with a life of its own. The manor above had been oppressive, its heavy drapes and whispered secrets suffocating. But this subterranean world was something else entirely, a place where time itself seemed to have been buried and forgotten. Poirot's mustache twitched as he inhaled the musty scent of earth and decay, his mind cataloging every detail, the faint drip of water somewhere distant, the occasional skitter of unseen creatures, the way the air grew colder with each step. He was no stranger to danger, but this place tested even his ironclad resolve. The map had led him here, to a passage hidden beneath the locked room in Vane Manor. Clara Vane's untouched belongings in that room, her hairbrush, her embroidered shawl, her diary filled with cryptic fears, had been a breadcrumb trail, and now this tunnel was the next crumb. The discovery of the map in the cemetery had been a triumph, but surviving the collapsing grave trap had been a stark reminder that someone, or something, did not want him here. Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "Bon," he murmured to himself. "The more they try to hide, the closer I am to the truth." He paused at a fork in the tunnel, consulting the map. The parchment was brittle, its edges frayed, but the lines were clear. A labyrinth of passages snaking beneath the manor, some leading to dead ends, others to places marked with cryptic symbols. One symbol, a crude spiral with a slash through. It matched the medallion he'd found in the library's hidden panel. It appeared again and again on the map, as if it were the heart of this underground maze. Poirot's gray cells hummed. The medallion, the chapel's symbols, Clara's locatal, were threads in a tapestry he was only beginning to unravel. Choosing the left passage, he moved cautiously, his lantern held high. The walls here were different, not just rough stone, but carved with faint, deliberate marks, lines, and curves that might have been letters or runes, worn smooth by time. He traced one with a gloved finger, noting its similarity to the chapel's etchings. A language of secrets, he mused, aloud, his voice echoing faintly. But whose secrets, and why hide them here? The tunnel sloped downward, and the air grew heavier, pressing against his chest. His lantern flickered, the flame stuttering as if starved for oxygen. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He adjusted the wick, but the light dimmed further, casting the passage into near darkness. A chill ran through him, not from the cold, but from the sudden certainty that he was not alone. He froze, listening. The drip of water had stopped, the skittering had ceased, but there was something else, a soft, rhythmic scrape, like leather against stone, coming from the darkness ahead. "Monsieur or Madame," Poirot called, his voice calm but firm. "It is most impolite to lurk in shadows. Show yourself, if you please." Silence answered, but the scraping stopped. Poirot's hand tightened around his cane, its silver handle a reassuring weight. He took a step forward, then another, his senses straining. The lantern flickered again, and in that fleeting moment of light, he saw it, a footprint in the dust, fresh and unmistakable, its edges sharp. Someone had been here recently, perhaps moments ago. He knelt, examining the print. It was large, likely a man's, with a distinctive tread pattern that suggested boots, not the fine shoes of the manor's inhabitants. A groundskeeper, perhaps, or someone else, someone who moved through these tunnels with purpose. Poirot straightened, his mind racing. The map had led him here, but it had not warned of company. The tunnel widened into a chamber, its ceiling supported by crude stone pillars that seemed to groan under the weight of the earth above. Poirot's lantern, now barely aglow, illuminated a scene that made his breath catch. The floor was littered with signs of recent activity. A pile of wax strippings, from candles, a torn scrap of fabric, and most chillingly a small, glinting object half buried in the dust. He approached, his heart pounding, and retrieved it. It was a locket, its silver surface engraved with a delicate C. Clara's locket. He opened it, revealing a miniature portrait of a young woman with sharp, intelligent eyes. Clara Vane. The other half held a lock of dark hair, tied with a thin ribbon. Poirot's fingers trembled slightly as he closed it, slipping the locket into his pocket. This was no coincidence. Clara had been Hercule. Someone had brought her locket to this place. The chamber felt like a shrine, or perhaps a prison. A sudden rumble shook the ground, a low guttural sound that vibrated through the stone. Poirot spun, his cane raised, but the sound came from everywhere and nowhere. Dust sifted from the ceiling, coating his hat and shoulders. The rumble grew louder, and then, with a deafening crack, a section of the tunnel behind him collapsed, sending a cloud of dirt and stone billowing toward him. He dove forward, shielding his face, his lantern clattering to the ground and extinguishing itself. Darkness enveloped him. For a moment, it was only the sound of his own breathing, rapid but controlled. Poirot forced himself to stand, brushing the dust from his coat. "Sacre bleu," he muttered, his voice steady despite the chaos. "This is no accident. Someone had triggered the collapse, perhaps watching him even now." The thought sent a spark of adrenaline through him, sharpening his senses. He fumbled in his pocket for a match, striking it against the rough wall. The tiny flame revealed the chamber in stark relief. The pillars, the wax drippings, and, in the far corner, a narrow passage he hadn't noticed before. The map was still in his hand, crumpled but intact. He smoothed it out, holding the match close. The spiral symbol appeared again, marking a point just beyond the chamber, the chapel. The passage must lead there. But the match burned low, and the darkness pressed in. Poirot lit another, moving swiftly toward the passage. The air grew fresher, a faint breeze suggesting an exit. His heart lifted, but caution tempered his optimism. The cloaked figure he'd seen in the woods, the footprints, the collapsal pointed to a living, breathing adversary. Someone who knew these tunnels as well as, or better than, he did. The passage twisted upward, the stone giving way to packed earth. Roots protruded from the walls, brushing against his shoulders like skeletal fingers. Poirot's mind churned, piecing together the puzzle. Clara's locket suggested she had been held here, perhaps against her will. The wax drippings and footprints indicated recent activity, possibly a ritual tied to the medallion and the chapel's symbols. And the collapse. A trap, meant to bury him or scare him off. But Hercule Poirot was not so easily deterred. The passage ended at a wooden trapdoor, its edges caked with dirt. Poirot pushed against it, but it held fast, locked from above. He pressed his ear to the wood, listening. Faint voices drifted through, low, urgent, and unfamiliar. He caught fragments, must be stopped, and the relic. His pulse quickened. The voices were in the chapel, and they were speaking of him more, the medallion. He searched the trapdoor's edges, finding a rusted latch. With his cane, he pried it open, the wood creaking ominously. The voices stopped. Poirot extinguished his match, plunging himself into darkness once more, and waited. Silence stretched, broken only by the distant drip of water. Then, a soft thud, as if someone had stepped closer to the trapdoor. Poirot's hand tightened on his cane. He was prepared to face whoever or whatever was above, but he preferred the element of surprise. With a sudden heave, he pushed the trapdoor open, emerging into the dim, flickering light of the abandoned chapel. The air was heavy with the scent of wax and incense, and the walls glowed with the same cryptic symbols he'd seen before. But the chapel was empty, or so it seemed. Poirot's eyes scanned the shadows, catching a faint movement behind the altar. He stepped forward, his cane tapping the floor. "Monsieur," he said, his voice cutting through the silence, "you cannot hide from Hercule Poirot. Come out, and let us speak as civilized men." A figure emerged, cloaked in black, its face obscured by a hood. The figure held a candle, its flame casting eerie shadows across the chapel's walls. "You're persistent, Poirot," the figure said, its voice low and distorted, as if speaking through a cloth. "But you're meddling in things you cannot understand." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Au contraire, I understand quite well. You are part of this society, are you not? The one tied to the medallion, to Clara Vane's disappearance. And now, you seek to stop me with crude traps and collapsing tunnels." The figure laughed, a sound that sent a shiver down Poirot's spine. "You think you've unraveled it all, don't you? The medallion, the tunnels, the girl. But you're only scratching the surface. Detective, leave now, or you'll be buried deeper than these tunnels." Poirot stepped closer, undeterred. "Threats do not sway, Hercule Poirot. Tell me, what is the purpose of this society? Why was Clara taken, and why do you fear her so?" The figure's candle flickered, and for a moment, Poirot thought he saw a glint of fear in the shadowed eyes beneath the hood. "Clara was a fool," the figure spat. "She thought she could expose us, destroy what we've built over centuries. But she's gone, and you'll join her if you don't stop." Before Poirot could respond, the figure hurled the candle at him, the flame arcing through the air. Poirot dodged, the candle shattering against the wall, wax splattering like blood. The figure bolted for a side door, but Poirot was faster, his cane hooking the figure's ankle. The cloaked stranger stumbled, crashing to the floor, the hood falling back to reveal a face Poirot hadn't expected. The groundskeeper, his weathered features twisted in rage. "You," Poirot exclaimed, his mind racing. The always lurking at the edges of the manor, had warned him of the wood's strange lights. Was it a ruse, or something more complex? The groundskeeper scrambled to his feet, but Poirot blocked the door, his cane raised like a sword. "Enough running," he said. "Speak, or I shall ensure the authorities do it for you." The groundskeeper's eyes darted, searching for an escape. "You don't know what you're up against," he growled. "The order. It's bigger than this village, bigger than you. Clara was a threat, but you're a nuisance." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A nuisance who has found your ritual chamber, your locket, your tunnels. Tell me where Clara is, or I shall become far more than a nuisance." The groundskeeper lunged, but Poirot sidestepped, his cane striking the man's knee with precision. The groundskeeper collapsed, clutching his leg, and Poirot stood over him, his voice cold. "The little gray cells, they do not rest. Where is she?" Before the groundskeeper could answer, a distant shout echoed from outside the chapel, voices, plural, approaching fast. Poirot's head snapped toward the sound. Reinforcements, or villagers, drawn by the commotion. He had no time to decide. He bound the groundskeeper's wrists with a cord from his pocket, a trick learned from years of necessity, and dragged him behind the altar. The chapel door burst open, revealing Edgar Vane, his face pale and frantic. "Poirot," he gasped. "I heard a collapse. I thought you were in the tunnels." Poirot's eyes narrowed. Edgar's arrival was convenient, too convenient. "Monsieur Vane," he said smoothly, "your concern is touching. But tell me, why are you here, in this chapel, at this hour?" Edgar hesitated, his eyes flickering to the bound groundskeeper. I followed you," he admitted. "I saw you leave the manor, and I was worried. The tunnels aren't safe." Poirot's smile was thin. "And yet, you did not warn me before I entered." "Curious, no." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Perhaps you know more about these tunnels, this order, than you have let on." Edgar's face drained of color. "I don't know what you mean, but Poirot cut him off, his tone sharp. "Enough games, monsieur. The locket, the medallion, the symbols, they all point to a truth you have avoided. Speak, or I shall assume you are complicit." The groundskeeper laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "He's as deep in it as I am, Poirot. Ask him about the meetings, the rituals. Ask him what he did to Clara." Edgar's eyes widened, but before he could speak, the chapel filled with more voices, villagers, their lanterns casting wild shadows. Poirot's mind raced. He had Clara's locket, proof of her presence in the tunnels. He had the groundskeeper, a key to the order. And now, Edgar, caught in a web of suspicion. The truth was close, but danger closer still. He slipped the locket deeper into his pocket, his decision made. "Mise amiss," he called to the villagers, his voice commanding. "This man is a criminal, and there is much to uncover. Take him to the inn, and guard him well. I, Hercule Poirot, shall return with answers." As the villagers dragged the groundskeeper away, Poirot turned to Edgar, his eyes piercing. "You and I, monsieur, shall have a long conversation. But first, I must ensure Clara Vane is found." The chapel fell silent, save for the flicker of lanterns and the weight of unspoken truths. Poirot stepped into the night, the fog curling around him like a living thing. The tunnels had revealed their dread, but the heart of the mystery still beat, somewhere in the shadows of Blackthorn Hollow. Chapter 9. The Village Betrayal. The fog clung to Blackthorn Hollow like a jealous lover, its tendrils curling around the gnarled oaks and seeping into the cracks of the village's ancient stone walls. Hercule Poirot stood at the window of his room at the Blackthorn Inn, his sharp eyes scanning the murky street below. The air was heavy with secrets, and the little Belgian detective's mind buzzed with the threads of the mystery he was unraveling. Clara Vane's locket, tucked safely in his waistcoat pocket, weighed heavier than its delicate silver frame suggested. Its discovery in the ritual chamber beneath Vane Manor had confirmed his suspicions. Someone in this village was orchestrating a deception far darker than a simple disappearance. The morning was young, its pale light barely piercing the fog, but Poirot was already dressed in his immaculate suit, his mustache perfectly waxed. He had not slept much. His little gray cells had been too busy weaving together the clues. The coded letter he'd found in Edgar Vane's room was the key, its cryptic symbols matching those in Clara's diary. It pointed to a meeting at the abandoned chapel in the woods, scheduled for tonight. Poirot's lips twitched into a faint smile. The game was afoot, and he intended to be several steps ahead of his quarry. He descended the creaking stairs to the inn's common room, where the scent of stale ale and burnt toast hung in the air. The innkeeper, Mr. Amos Finch, stood behind the counter, polishing a glass with a rag that looked older than the inn itself. His weathered face betrayed nothing, but Poirot had learned to read the subtle signs of unease, the slight tremor in Finch's hands, the way his eyes darted to the door whenever a new patron entered. "Good morning, Monsieur Finch," Poirot said, his voice crisp and polite as he settled at a corner table. "A pot of tea, if you please, and perhaps a moment of your time." Finch's shoulders stiffened, but he nodded, pouring hot water into a chipped teapot. "What's on your mind, Mr. Poirot? You've been poking around the village enough to stir up trouble." "Trouble, mon ami, is already here," Poirot replied, his tone light but his eyes piercing. "It hides in the shadows, in the whispers of this village. Tell me, have you seen Monsieur Edgar Vane recently? Perhaps near the old chapel in the woods." Finch's rag paused mid-swipe, and for a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. "The chapel? Ain't nobody goes there. It's cursed, they say. Been abandoned since my granddad's time. Yet someone has been there," Poirot said, leaning forward. "Candles burned recently. Footprints marked the dust. And I suspect you know more than you let on. Come, Monsieur Finch. The truth is a burden best shared." Finch set the glass down with a clink, his jaw tight. "You're a nosy one, aren't you? Fine. I saw Edgar Vane skulking around the woods a few nights back, near the chapel. Looked like he didn't want to be seen. But that's all I know, and I ain't saying more." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Mercy, Monsieur Finch. Your candor is most appreciated." As Finch retreated to the kitchen, Poirot sipped his tea, his mind racing. Edgar's presence at the chapel aligned with the coded letter's implications. But why the secrecy? Was Edgar the cloaked figure Poirot had seen fleeing the chapel, or was he merely a pawn in a larger game? The detective's instincts told him the answer lay in the meeting tonight. He would need to be cautious. Blackthorn Hollow was a village of masks, and trust was a luxury he could not afford by midday. Poirot had made his way to Vane Manor, his polished shoes crunching against a gravel path. The manor loomed like a brooding sentinel, its ivy-clad walls hiding countless secrets. He had no intention of confronting Edgar directly, not yet. Instead, he sought the one person who might unwittingly reveal more. Miss Lila Gray, the governess. Her confession in the library had been illuminating, but Poirot sensed she was still holding back pieces of the puzzle. He found her in the manor's rose garden, pruning a tangle of thorns with a pair of shears. Her auburn hair was pinned loosely, and her face bore the strain of sleepless nights. She started as Poirot approached, the shears slipping slightly in her grip. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice a mix of relief and wariness. "You move so quietly. I didn't hear you." "A habit of my profession, Mademoiselle Gray," Poirot said with a small bow. "I wished to speak with you about Monsieur Edgar. You have been most forthcoming about Clara Vane, but I wonder, what do you know of Edgar's movements the night she disappeared?" Lila's eyes flickered, and she set the shears down on a stone bench. "Edgar, he was distant that night. Kept to his study, or so he said. I didn't see him after dinner." And yet Poirot said, his tone gentle but probing, "He was seen near the chapel in the woods, a curious place for a man to wander at night." Nan Lila's hands twisted in her apron. "The chapel, I don't know why he'd go there. It's a ruin, nothing more. Clara used to talk about it, said it held secrets about the Vane family. But Edgar, he never showed interest in such things." Poirot tilted his head, studying her. "And you, mademoiselle, have you ever visited this chapel?" She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the roses. "Once, long ago, when I first came to the manor. It was unsettling. The air felt wrong, like something was watching. I never went back." Poirot nodded, filing away her words. "Merci, Mademoiselle Gray. You have been most helpful." As he turned to leave, Lila called after him, "Monsieur Poirot, please, be careful. There's something dark in this village. I can feel it." Poirot gave her a reassuring smile. "Fear not, mademoiselle. Hercule Poirot is no stranger to the dark." The afternoon passed in a blur of preparation. Poirot returned to the inn, where he meticulously reviewed the coded letter from Edgar's room. The symbols were intricate, a blend of alchemical signs and shorthand that matched Clara's diary. After an hour of careful work, he deciphered the message. "Midnight, chapel, bring the relic." The relic, Poirot surmised, was the medallion he'd found in the library's hidden panel, a cursed object tied to the Vane family's sinister history. But who was Edgar meeting, and why? As dusk fell, Poirot donned a dark overcoat, tucking his walking stick under his arm. The fog had thickened, turning the village into a labyrinth of shadows. He slipped out of the inn, avoiding the main road, and made his way toward the woods. The air was damp, carrying the scent of moss and decay. His footsteps were silent on the forest floor, guided only by the faint glow of a pocket lantern. Chapel emerged from the mist like a ghost, its crumbling spire piercing the sky. Poirot extinguished his lantern and crept closer, his senses sharp. The windows flickered with candlelight, just as they had during his previous visit. He positioned himself behind a gnarled yew tree, its branches offering cover as he peered through a cracked window. Inside, a figure in a hooded cloak stood before a makeshift altar, arranging candles in a circular pattern. The figure's movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic. Poirot's heart quickened as the hood slipped slightly, revealing Edgar Vane's pale, angular face. So, it was him. But what was he doing? Edgar lit the final candle, muttering words Poirot couldn't hear. The air grew heavy, and a faint hum seemed to rise from the stone walls. Poirot's eyes narrowed as Edgar produced a medallion from his pocket, placing it at the center of the altar. The detective's mind raced. Was this a ritual, or a performance meant to deceive? He needed to see more. Suddenly, a twig snapped behind him. Poirot froze, his hand tightening on his walking stick. He turned slowly, expecting to find an animal or a stray branch. Instead, a shadow loomed in the fog, a second figure, cloaked and silent, watching him. Before Poirot could react, the figure bolted into the woods, their footsteps swallowed by the mist. Poirot hesitated only a moment before returning his attention to the chapel. Edgar was still there, oblivious to the intruder outside. The detective weighed his options. Confronting Edgar now might force his hand, but it could also scatter the pieces of the puzzle. No, Poirot decided. He would retreat and plan his next move. Knowledge was his weapon, and he needed more. Back at the inn, Poirot sat by the fire, the locket and the coded letter spread before him. Edgar's ritual suggested a deeper connection to the cult Clara had been investigating. But the second figure in the woods complicated matters. Was it an ally of Edgar's, or someone else entirely? The groundskeeper, perhaps, or another villager hiding their true face? Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at his door. It was Amos Finch, his face pale, and his hands clutching a crumpled note. "Found this slipped under the bar," Finch said, his voice low. "It's addressed to you." Poirot took the note, his fingers brushing the rough paper. It was written in a hurried scrawl. "Leave Blackthorn Hollow, or the shadows will claim you." The threat was crude, but it confirmed Poirot's suspicions. Someone knew he was closing in. Maracy. "Monsieur Finch," Poirot said, folding the note. "Tell me, have you seen anyone unusual at the inn tonight?" Finch shook his head. "Just the usual lot. But there's been talk. Folks say the manor's cursed, that the Vanes brought something evil here long ago. Maybe you're stirring it up." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Perhaps, mon ami, but Hercule Poirot does not stir trouble without purpose." Bonne nuit. As Finch left, Poirot leaned back, his mind a whirlwind of connections. Edgar's ritual, the cloaked figure, the threatening note, all pointed to a conspiracy rooted in the village's heart. He would confront Edgar soon, but first, he needed to confirm the traitor's identity. The chapel meeting was the key, and Poirot would be there, hidden in the shadows, ready to unmask the truth. The night was black as pitch when Poirot returned to the chapel, his steps silent and his senses alert. He had chosen a different vantage point this time, nestled among the roots of an ancient oak. The fog was thinner now, allowing slivers of moonlight to illuminate the chapel's broken roof. Inside, the candles burned brighter, their flames casting eerie shadows on the walls. Edgar arrived precisely at midnight, his cloak billowing as he entered the chapel. He carried a small leather case, which he placed on the altar beside the medallion. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Was this the relic the letter mentioned, or something else? Moments later, Another figure entered, a woman, her face obscured by a shawl. Poirot strained to see her features, but the candlelight was too dim. She spoke in a low, urgent tone, her words indistinct but her gestures agitated. Edgar responded, his voice sharp, and the two seemed to argue. Poirot crept closer, risking discovery, to catch their words. "You promised it would end," the woman hissed. "Clara's gone, and now this. You're in too deep, Edgar." "You don't understand," Edgar snapped. "The medallion is the key. Without it, we're all doomed." Poirot's heart raced. The woman's voice was familiar. Leela Gray. No, it couldn't be. Her tone was too commanding, too unlike the nervous governess. But who else could it be? Before Poirot could move closer, the woman turned abruptly, her shawl slipping to reveal a glimpse of silver hair. Lady Evelyn Vane, the matriarch herself. Poirot's mind whirled. Was she the mastermind, or another pawn? He needed to hear more, but the risk was too great. He retreated into the shadows, his heart pounding with the thrill of discovery. The next morning, Poirot sat in his room, piecing together the night's revelations. Edgar's ritual, Lady Evelyn's presence. The coded letter all pointed to a conspiracy that reached the heart of Vane Manor. But the second cloaked figure from his first visit to the chapel remained a mystery. Was it the groundskeeper, as he suspected, or someone else entirely? He decided to search Edgar's room again, hoping for more clues. Slipping into the manor under the guise of a morning visit, he found Edgar absent and the room unlocked. The desk was a mess of papers, but one caught his eye, a map of the village, with the chapel and cemetery marked in red ink. Beside it was another coded letter, its symbols identical to Clara's diary. Poirot worked quickly, decoding it with practiced ease. Tomorrow, midnight, chapel. The circle closes. The circle. The phrase sent a chill down Poirot's spine. It echoed the village historian's tales of a cult that had plagued Blackthorn Hollow for centuries. Clara had been close to exposing it, and someone, Edgar, Lady Evelyn, or another, had silenced her. But she was alive, Poirot was certain, hidden somewhere beyond the village's reach. He pocketed the letter and left the room, his mind set on the chapel meeting. Tonight, he would confront Edgar and unmask the truth. But he would need to be clever. Blackthorn Hollow was a village of betrayal, and Poirot was playing a dangerous game. As midnight approached, Poirot positioned himself inside the chapel, hidden behind a crumbling pillar. He had arrived early, ensuring no one would see him enter. The candles were already lit, their flames casting a sickly glow. Edgar arrived first, his face pale and his hands trembling as he set the medallion on the altar. Then came Lady Evelyn, her silver hair gleaming in the candlelight. "You're late," Edgar hissed. "I had to be sure no one followed," she replied, her voice cold. "Did you bring it?" Edgar nodded, opening the leather case to reveal a small, ornate dagger. The final piece. With this, the ritual is complete. Poirot's breath caught. A ritual dagger, a medallion, a secret society. The pieces were falling into place. But before he could act, a third figure entered the chapel, cloaked and silent. Edgar and Lady Evelyn froze, their faces a mask of fear. "You thought you could hide from us," the figure said, their voice low and menacing. They threw back their hood, revealing the groundskeeper, his weathered face twisted with rage. "The circle demands loyalty, and you've betrayed it." Poirot stepped from the shadows, his walking stick raised. "Enough, Mies Amos," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "The game is over. Hercule Poirot has seen enough." The groundskeeper lunged, but Poirot was ready, sidestepping and striking the man's wrist with his stick. The dagger clattered to the floor, and Edgar scrambled to grab it. Lady Evelyn screamed, her composure shattered. "Stay where you are," Monsieur Edgar Poirot said, his tone calm but commanding. "And you, Monsieur Groundskeeper, will explain your role in this." "Circle," the groundskeeper snarled, but Poirot's gaze held him fast. "You are the leader of this cult, Nan, the one who has manipulated the Vanes, who silenced Clara Vane to protect your secrets. But you underestimated Hercule Poirot." The groundskeeper's defiance crumbled, and he sank to his knees. It's bigger than you know, he muttered. The medallion, its power, not a curse. Clara wanted to expose us, to ruin everything. And so you hid her, Poirot said, turning to Edgar and Lady Evelyn. But you, Madame, and you, Monsieur, played your parts. You knew Clara was alive, hidden to protect your family's shame. Tell me, where is she? Lady Evelyn's lips trembled. She's safe. In a town nearby. We didn't want this. The groundskeeper forced us. Poirot nodded, his mind already planning his next move. We shall see. Madame, for now, you will all remain here until the authorities arrive. As dawn broke over Blackthorn Hollow, Poirot stood outside the chapel, watching as the local constable took the groundskeeper into custody. Edgar and Lady Evelyn were questioned, their secrets laid bare. The medallion and dagger were seized as evidence, and the village buzzed with the news of the cult's exposure. Poirot returned to the inn, his heart light but his mind already turning to Clara. The groundskeeper's confession had given him her vocation, a small town 20 miles away. He would find her, bring her back, and ensure the cult's influence was truly broken. As he packed his bag, Poirot allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The little gray cells had triumphed once again, peeling back the layers of betrayal to reveal the truth. Blackthorn Hollow would heal, and Clara Vane would be free. But for now, he had a train to catch and a mystery to complete. Chapter 10. The Mask of Motivare. In Vane Manor hung heavy with suspicion, as if the walls themselves held their breath, waiting for Hercule Poirot to unravel the tangled threads of deceit. The morning sun struggled to pierce the fog that clung to Blackthorn Hollow, casting the manor in a ghostly pallor. Poirot stood in the grand library, his small, precise hands clasped behind his back, his mustache impeccably groomed despite the hour. His gray cells churned, piecing together the fragments of Clara Vane's disappearance. The coded letters, and the sinister whispers of a cult tied to the Vane family's legacy. Edgar Vane, the withdrawn son of the imperious Lady Evelyn, was now the focal point of his scrutiny. Poirot's confrontation with Edgar was no impulsive act. The discovery of the coded letter in Edgar's roommate's cipher matching Clara's diary had been a revelation, a spark in the darkness of the mystery. The letter pointed to a clandestine meeting at the abandoned chapel, and Edgar's presence there, cloaked and muttering incantations, had confirmed Poirot's suspicions. Yet, the detective's instinct told him the truth was not so simple. Edgar's nervous demeanor, his quick denials, and the flicker of fear in his eyes suggested a man caught in a web, not entirely of his own making. Poirot arranged to meet Edgar in the manor's conservatory, a glass-walled enclosure filled with exotic plants that seemed to whisper secrets of their own. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming orchids, a stark contrast to the chill of the manor's stone corridors. Edgar arrived, his lanky frame slouched, his eyes darting like a cornered animal. He wore a tweed jacket, slightly frayed at the cuffs, and his hands fidgeted with a silver cigarette case he never opened. Monsieur Vane, Poirot began, his voice smooth but edged with steel. You will explain, s'il vous plaît, your presence at the chapel last night. The cloak, the ritual, the coded letter, these are not the actions of an innocent man. Edgar's face paled, his lips parting as if to protest, but no words came. He sank onto a wicker chair, the creak of the furniture echoing in the quiet. I wasn't harming anyone, Monsieur Poirot. You must believe me. It was a mistake, a foolish act. Poirot's eyes narrowed, his head tilting slightly. A mistake. To deign a cloak and chant in a ruined chapel at midnight. Nan, monsieur. This is not a mistake. This is a performance. But for whom? And to what end? Edgar's fingers tightened around the cigarette case, his knuckles whitening. It's not what you think. Clara, my sister, she was digging into things she shouldn't have. The family's history, the manor, the order. Poirot's mustache twitched. The order. You speak of this cult. Yes. The one tied to the medallion, to the vanishings over centuries. Edgar nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara found documents in the library. Old records about the Vane family's ties to a group called the Order of the Saffron Veil. They were powerful, once wealthy. They believed the medallion held some kind of influence. Clara thought it was nonsense at first, but she became obsessed. She said she could expose them, make a fortune selling the story to the papers. Poirot paced slowly, his polished shoes clicking against the tiled floor. And you, Monsieur Edgar, what was your role in this? Did you help your sister, or did you betray her? I didn't betray her. Edgar's voice cracked, his eyes wide with desperation. I tried to stop her. She was reckless, stirring up things that should have stayed buried. Mother Lady Evelinci knew about Clara's research. She said it would ruin us, bring shame to the vain name. She told me to make Clara stop. Poirot stopped pacing, his gaze piercing. And how, precisely, did Lady Evelyn propose to stop Mademoiselle Clara? Edgar hesitated, his breath uneven. She said we had to hide Clara's findings, make it seem like she'd gone mad or run off. Mother arranged for Clara to disappear, not hurt, just kept away, she said. It was for Clara's own safety. I didn't know about the chapel or the rituals until later. I only went there because I found Clara's notes, and I thought I could understand what she'd uncovered. Poirot's expression remained unreadable, but his mind raced. Edgar's story had the ring of truth, yet it was riddled with gaps. Why would Lady Evelyn, a woman of iron control, resort to such drastic measures to protect a reputation? And if Clara was merely hidden, why the elaborate charade of a disappearance? The coded letter suggested a deeper conspiracy, one that Edgar might not fully grasp. Very well, Monsieur Poirot said, his tone softening but still commanding. Let us assume, for now, that you speak the truth. But you must tell me where is Clara now, and what of this ritual you performed? Edgar shook his head, his voice trembling. I don't know where she is. Mother handled everything. The ritual, it was nothing, just me trying to piece together Clara's notes. I found instructions in her diary, something about invoking the veil. I thought if I followed them, I'd find answers, but it was empty, Monsieur Poirot. Just shadows and echoes. Before Poirot could press further, a deafening crash shattered the morning's stillness. The conservatory's glass ceiling trembled as a wave of heat rolled through the air. Shouts echoed from the manor's west wing, followed by the unmistakable crackle of flames. Poirot's eyes widened, his instincts flaring. Mon Dieu, a fire! He and Edgar sprinted toward the source, the acrid smell of smoke growing stronger with each step. The west wing, where the family's private quarters lay, was engulfed in chaos. Servants ran through the halls, clutching linens and buckets, their faces pale with panic. Flames licked the walls of a corridor, devouring tapestries and blackening the oak paneling. Lady Evelyn stood at the far end, her silk robe pristine despite the chaos, her expression a mask of cold resolve. Madame, Poirot called, weaving through the fleeing servants. What has happened? Is anyone harmed? Lady Evelyn's eyes flicked to him, then to Edgar, who trailed behind, coughing from the smoke. A careless maid, no doubt, she said, her voice steady. A lamp overturned, perhaps. The fire is contained, Monsieur Poirot. There is no need for alarm. But Poirot's gaze sharpened. The fire's origin was no accident. He could smell the sharp tints of kerosene, a scent no lamp would leave in such quantity. His eyes darted to the floor, where a singed scrap of paper lay amidst the debris. He knelt swiftly, retrieving it before the flames could claim it. The paper was brittle, its edges charred, but the words were clear. The veil must not be lifted. The price is too great. Below it was a symbol crescent moon pierced by a dagger, identical to the medallion's mark. Poirot slipped the paper into his pocket, his mind racing. The fire was no mere mishap. It was a deliberate act to destroy evidence. But whose evidence? Clara's, as Edgar claimed, or Lady Evelyn's, to bury her own secrets. The matriarch's composure was too perfect, her answers too rehearsed. Poirot resolved to test her, but first, he needed to ensure the manor's safety. Madame, said his voice calm but firm, you will assemble the household. We must account for everyone and ensure no further accidents occur. Lady Evelyn's lips tightened, but she nodded. As you wish, monsieur. The household gathered in the grand hall, a cavernous space with high ceilings and portraits of stern-faced vain ancestors glaring down. The servants whispered among themselves, their eyes darting to the smoke-stained walls. Edgar stood apart, his hands still clutching the cigarette case, his face a mixture of guilt and fear. Miss Leela Gray, the governess, hovered near the edge of the group, her pale face betraying her unease. Poirot noted her presence, recalling her earlier confession about Clara's argument with a stranger. Was she an ally, or another piece in this intricate puzzle? As the head butler called the roll, Poirot's attention shifted to the singed document in his pocket. The words gnawed at him. The price is too great. What price? Clara's life, the Vane family's honor, or something darker, tied to the order of the Saffron Veil. He needed to confront Lady Evelyn, but not here, not with so many ears listening. The opportunity came that afternoon, in the manor's drawing room. The fire had been extinguished, leaving the west wing a smoldering ruin. Lady Evelyn sat by a window, her hands folded in her lap, her posture as rigid as the marble statues in the garden. Poirot entered without knocking, his small frame commanding the room's attention. "Madame," he began, closing the door behind him, "we must speak of Clara and of the fire. I have found evidence that suggests it was no accident. A document bearing the mark of the medallion was nearly destroyed. You will tell me, s'il vous plaît, what you know of this." Lady Evelyn's eyes flickered, but her composure held. "You overstep, Monsieur Poirot. The fire was a tragedy, nothing more. As for Clara, I have told you she is safe, hidden, to protect her from her own recklessness." Poirot stepped closer, his voice low but piercing. "Hidden or silenced? Your son claims you orchestrated Clara's disappearance to protect the family's name. Yet I find it curious, madame, that a fire should erupt just as I uncover a letter tied to the order. A letter that speaks of a price too great. What is this price, madame, and why does it require such destruction?" For the first time, Lady Evelyn's mask slipped, her hands trembled slightly, and her voice took on a sharp edge. "You know nothing of our burdens, monsieur. The Vane family has carried secrets for generations, secrets that protect, not harm. Clara was a fool, chasing ghosts for profit. I did what was necessary to keep her safe, and the fire," Poirot pressed, "was that necessary as well?" Lady Evelyn's eyes flashed. "I had no part in that. If there was a document, it was not mine. Perhaps Edgar, in his panic, sought to destroy Clara's notes. He's weak, monsieur, easily swayed." Poirot's mustache twitched again. Her deflection was clever, but it only deepened his suspicion. Lady Evelyn was no mere bystander. Her control over the household, her unwavering calm, suggested a woman who orchestrated events with precision. Yet Edgar's fear was genuine, and the coded letter pointed to a conspiracy beyond a single family's shame. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Miss Leela Gray entered, her face pale but resolute. "Monsieur," she said, her voice trembling, "I found something in the library, a book Clara was reading before she vanished. It mentions the order and a ritual to be performed tonight. I thought you should know." Poirot's eyes lit up. "Merci, mademoiselle. You have done well. Show me this book." The library was a labyrinth of dusty tomes and shadowed corners, its air thick with the scent of aged leather. Leila led Poirot to a small table, where a leather-bound volume lay open. The pages were yellowed, the text written in a spidery hand. Poirot scanned the passage Leila indicated, his lips moving silently as he read. "The Order of the Saffron Veil guards the medallion's power. On the night of the crescent moon, the veil must be invoked, lest the watcher claim its due. The price is blood, but the reward is dominion." Poirot's heart quickened. The crescent moon tonight, the ritual Edgar had attempted, was no mere imitation. It was part of a larger design. But who was the watcher, and whose blood was the price? "Mademoiselle Gray," Poirot said, turning to Leela, "you will accompany me tonight. We must return to the chapel, but with utmost caution. The truth is close, but so is the danger." Lila nodded, her eyes wide but determined. "I'll help you, monsieur, for Clara." As dusk fell, Poirot prepared for the night's investigation. He slipped a singed document and Clara's locket into his pocket, their weight a reminder of the stakes. The manor was quiet, the servants still shaken by the fire, but Poirot sensed eyes watching from the shadows. Lady Evelyn's words echoed in his mind. Secrets that protect, not harm. Yet the fire, the coded letters, and the chapel's rituals suggested a truth far more sinister. The fog returned as Poirot and Lila approached the chapel, its spire a dark silhouette against the moonlit sky. The crescent moon hung low, its light casting eerie patterns on the ground. Poirot's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the thrill of the chase. The little gray cells were alight, piecing together the puzzle. Edgar's ritual, Lady Evelyn's denials, the fire, the medallion, all were threads in a tapestry of deceit. Inside the chapel, the air was cold, the candlelight flickering as if alive. Poirot's eyes scanned the walls, noting the cryptic symbols he'd seen before. Lila clutched a book, her breath visible in the chill. "Monsieur," she whispered, "the ritual it's supposed to happen at midnight. We don't have much time." Before Poirot could respond, a low chant echoed from the shadows. A figure emerged, cloaked as before, but this time Poirot was ready. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the darkness. "Enough, monsieur. The game is over. Show yourself." The figure froze, then slowly lowered the hood. It was not Edgar, but the groundskeeper, his weathered face twisted in a snarl. "You meddle where you're not wanted, detective," he spat. "The veil will rise, and the medallion will be ours." Poirot's mind raced. The groundskeeper a pawn, or the mastermind? The coded letter, the fire, the ritual all pointed to a larger conspiracy, one that Lady Evelyn might not fully control. He needed to act swiftly, to unmask the true motive before the night's ritual could claim its price. The chapter closed with Poirot stepping closer to the groundskeeper, his voice calm but unyielding. "You will tell me, monsieur, who pulls the strings of this order? And where is Clara Vane? The truth, or I assure you, the consequences will be most severe."